Chapter 3404. The boy didn't come alone. About 10 zhang behind him, there was a strange bird flying. This bird was 3 zhang in size, and its 2 zhang long feathers were black and white. Even the waist and the roots of the wings were black, while the tips of the wings were pure white. What was special was that the bird's neck was very long, at least 5 chi long. This 5 chi long neck didn't have a single feather, and if one looked carefully, a faint bronze color could be seen from the depths of the neck. On the back of the bird stood a woman dressed in palace attire. This woman was in her 20s, and her appearance didn't seem to be particularly outstanding. She had large eyes, slightly coarse eyebrows, and seemed to have gone through a lot of hardships. Although her skin was extremely white, the hand holding the soft sword was very large. Even if there was a golden hairpin inserted into her cloud-like hair, it still wouldn't make people drool. Amit Ba Buddha. The boy flew closer and saw Xiao Hua waiting there with his palms together. He also chanted the name of Buddha. This poor monk is Ci Hui. How should I address you? This poor monk. Tipu greets great master Ci Hui. When Xiao Hua heard that it was a monk of the Ci generation, he couldn't help but be secretly surprised. He hurriedly bowed and replied. Monk Ci Hui was surprised and asked curiously, why are you called Tipu? Although you are of the tantric lineage, shouldn't you also choose a dharma name within my Buddhist lineage? Great master. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. This poor monk was previously a Buddhist layman disciple and didn't shave his head and become a monk, so I don't have a real dharma name. Today was supposed to be a good day for this poor monk to shave his head, but this elder suddenly died, and he didn't have time to give this poor monk a dharma name. How is that possible? At this time, Ci Hui's azure lion had already set foot on the mountain range of the Great Snow Mountain. Ci Hui simply jumped down from the azure lion and walked to the front of the old monk's corpse to take a look. He turned his head and asked Xiao Hua, since you are going to shave your head, naturally you should prepare a dharma name before today and fill it in the certificate so that it can be sent to Lane Temple to report. How come you don't have a dharma name when it's time to shave your head? This poor monk doesn't know either. Xiao Hua was still smiling. This poor monk did not come from the Great Snow Mountain. Today, I was just passing by the Great Snow Mountain and saw a small temple on the mountain. I wanted to come in and ask for directions, but who would have thought that this elder was already at the end of his life? In order to pass down the mantle of Tantra, this poor monk reluctantly shaved his head. In the end, before the shaving was complete, this elder had already passed away. Therefore, this poor monk still does not have a dharma name. Immortal friend Ci Hui. At this moment, the woman riding the strange bird walked down from the sky and said with a smile, whether it is the courtesy name of my Confucian cultivator or your Buddhist sect's dharma name, they are just symbols. Could it be that immortal friend wants to find a suitable dharma name for immortal friend Tipu? Amit Ba, this poor monk is too obsessed. Hearing this, Ci Hui child immediately said with a smile, Ci Hui is Ti Hui, Tipu is also Ti Hui. Many thanks for new Tanua's reminder. There are very few Tantra disciples in the first place. This small temple on the Great Snow Mountain is even more difficult to find disciples, that woman said with a smile. I'm afraid that this master was fancied by this old monk as soon as he came to the Great Snow Mountain and hurriedly tricked him into the temple. Amit Ba, new Tanua is too serious. Ci Hui did not get angry and said with a smile, to enter my Buddhist sect, one must have good roots. Without several lifetimes of cultivation, it is simply impossible to enter my Buddhist sect. This monk must also have Buddhist fate. Today, he was able to shave his head and enter Tantra. Naturally, that woman was already used to Ci Hui's explanation. She said with a smile, you are the Buddhist sect's #1 strategist. Furthermore, you have the wisdom of 9 lifetimes. How can this little girl be your opponent? You can say whatever you want to say. Amit Ba, new Tanua is too serious again. Ci Hui wanted to say something again, but thinking about the woman's judgment just now, she smiled slightly, shook her head, and looked at the old monk's corpse. That woman looked at Xiao Hua with a smile and asked, Little monk, let me ask you. Just now, when the great snow mountain golden body appeared, did it have anything to do with you? This. Xiao Hua hesitated for a moment. He originally wanted to deny it, but after thinking about it again, this snowy mountain was extremely cold, and there were no temples nearby. Moreover, these two people must have sensed the strange phenomenon just now and rushed over. How could he easily deny it? Besides, now he had a completely different face. Even if he revealed his Taoist cultivation, so what? Yes, it was the strange phenomenon when this poor monk was shaved. Xiao Hua simply admitted. Who is New Tan Yue? Why don't you introduce yourself? Unfortunately, that woman looked at Ci Hui with interest and did not answer Xiao Hua's question. Oh, when you shave your head, you have hundreds of miles of psychokinesis on your body. Hearing this, Ci Hui faintly raised her eyebrows. Although it was a question, she was not particularly surprised. Hearing this, Xiao Hua was happy, but his face quickly changed into panic. He said in a low voice, "This poor monk does not know. This poor monk only knows that when I was shaved, there was a very strong wind. Even the hair this poor monk shaved was blown away." At that time, the old monk returned to the west. This poor monk was in a hurry and did not pay attention to the range of the psychokinesis. Amitabha, this monk really has a foundation. I don't know which senior brother's reincarnation you are. Ci Hui congratulated, but her eyes looked up and down at Xiao Hua and asked again. This poor monk only knows that Tantric Buddhism disciples all wear saffron monk robes. This poor monk does not know why this monk is wearing saffron Taoist robes? How would I know? Xiao Hua rolled his eyes and said, This is all this old monk's arrangement. If Grandmaster feels there is a problem, you can ask this old monk. Ask? Ci Hui was very curious about Xiao Hua's rolling eyes and this question. It seemed to be different from the monks she usually saw. The woman at the side said in a timely manner, Fellow Taoist Ci Hui, if fellow Taoist Tipu said so, I'm afraid you have already lost, right? Fellow Taoist not only wants to go to that place with this little woman, but also wants to invite fellow Taoist Tipu to go with you, right? Hearing this, a trace of a bitter smile appeared on Ci Hui's face. She shook her head slightly and said, Amitabha, this is all because this poor monk's cultivation is not enough. The little bit of desire to win in my heart cannot be erased. Now I have fallen into New Tenyu's trap. Fellow Taoist, you can't say that. The woman said with a smile, Meeting is fate. If you should not go to that place, I'm afraid you would not have met this little woman today, right? Moreover, if you should not go to that place, why would you make this bet with this little woman in order to leave? I'm afraid this is the only way to put it. Ci Hui smiled bitterly again. This poor monk lost my mind. I actually only remembered that condensing the golden body requires psychokinesis, but forgot that the reincarnated senior also has psychokinesis when shave. The woman said with a smile, The conditions this little woman provided are also not bad. Could it be that you did not come for these conditions? Perhaps? Ci Hui declined to comment. She turned to Xiao Hua and said with a smile, Monk, this poor monk has a good thing here. When Xiao Hua heard the two of them talking about that place, he immediately lost interest. He had just formed his nascent soul, and his Tao realm was not stable. He did not want to go to any dangerous place. What he wanted to do was to find a place to meditate. Moreover, the space meridian above the snowy mountain was unstable. If it was as Sun Jian said, he did not want to pass through the East Sea and South Sea, then he must hurry back to the Xiaoyu continent before the space meridian collapsed. Not going. Xiao Hua shook his head like a rattledrum. Without waiting for Ci Hui to finish speaking, he immediately shouted, This poor monk still has other things to do. After the old monk's skin is melted and his sarira is taken out, this poor monk will quickly leave this place. Leave this place? The woman's smiling face showed astonishment. Little master is already a monk in this temple. If he does not cultivate here, where else can he go? Xiao Hua was speechless. He could not arrogantly say that this temple was built just to wait for him, right? He could not say that this temple had no meaning to exist when he came, right? Lazy little monk. Ci Hui smiled. Your tantric sect is not prosperous. Now that you have just entered the tantric sect, your master has already returned to the West. Now you also want to abandon the temple and flee. This really makes this poor monk lament. Can't the cultivation of your previous lives make you wake up? Amitabha Buddha. Xiao Hua also smiled. With Buddha in my eyes, which part of the Pure Land is not Buddha? With Buddha in your body, which part of your every action is not cultivation? With Buddha in your heart, which part of the mountain and stone is not a temple? Why did Great Master not painstakingly guard the lamp in the temple and come to the snowy mountain to be carefree? When Cai Hui heard this, her expression slightly changed. She hurriedly raised her hand and said, Amitabha Buddha, this poor monk was wrong. Although little monk has just shaved his head in this life, the root of wisdom of several lives is still there. This poor monk previously wanted to recommend little monk to other temples to cultivate. Now it seems that this was a big mistake. If Great Master is not wrong, then this poor monk is also not right. If there is right and wrong in your heart, how can it still be free of filth? Xiao Hua still answered with a smile, not bowing to salute. Cai Hui's expression changed even more. He almost did not dare to believe his own ears. He lowered his head to look at the old monk on the wooden board, then raised his head to look at the calm and collected Xiao Hua. He took a few steps back, put his palms together, and said in a low voice, Amitabha Buddha, this poor monk has really learned something. Seeing this young monk's astonished appearance, Xiao Hua was quite proud. He did not feel that he could reach the realm of a senior monk like Cai Hui thought, but many times he could see through things with the eyes of a bystander and speak out like this. And it seemed that every time Xiao Hua spoke out, he had the posture of shocking the world with a single brilliant feat. This also showed that no matter if it was Buddhism or Taoism, when one cultivated to a high realm, they would achieve the same result through different means. Cai Hui lowered her head. Xiao Hua was proud. The woman in the palace dress next to him pursed her lips and smiled. She could not help but say, Fellow Taoist Cai Hui, saying is one thing, doing is another. This snowy mountain is covered with snow all year round. If the sky could be as clear as today, the herdsmen of the snowy mountain would not have to live such bitter and cold lives. These words, you can say it, I can say it, anyone can say it, but who can do it? Chapter 30, 405. Amitabha, fellow immortal, has misunderstood this poor monk. Cai Hui raised her head and looked at the woman. This poor monk is not stumped by this little monk's question. This poor monk is only thinking, this intelligent little monk, this Buddhist disciple of Tantric Buddhism with roots of wisdom, what should this poor monk do to guide him into the right path of Buddhist cultivation? Should this poor monk find an accomplished monk to teach him, or should this poor monk do it personally? Xiao Hua was shocked. His gaze swept over the young monk, and he asked indifferently, could it be that this poor monk is so mischievous in front of Master? Then this poor monk would like to ask Master, what is the right path, and what is the wrong path? You have yet to attain fruition, so how do you know which path is the right path? Even if Master has attained fruition, is your path definitely the right path? Is your right path definitely this poor monk's right path? Is I sure to attain fruition just because I follow your path? Hearing this, Cai Hui's face became even more bitter, as if she had a gold thread in her mouth. She lowered her head and chanted again. Amitabha, seeing this little monk today, this poor monk thinks of this poor monk's past. You don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. You don't know the vastness of the sea and sky. You don't know that there are many mysteries in this world that cannot be known by others. Humans are nothing more than dust in this world. What can cause clouds and rain with a flip of the hand? What can cause a dragon to fly in the sky with a flip of the hand? They're all absurd. Apart from arrogance, and contempt, what else can a human be? Only when one truly recognizes one's insignificance can one truly cultivate. The so-called cultivation is not how many Buddhist cultivation techniques one cultivates, or how many Buddhist secret techniques one cultivates, but how many Buddhist scriptures one reads, and how many good karma one bears. This poor monk even wants to say that the words in Buddhist scriptures can also kill, and only the spirit in Buddhist scriptures can let people live. In C.I. Huey's words, the first half made Xiao Hua sigh with emotion. It was exactly as he had thought, but the second half made Xiao Hua puzzled again. However, Xiao Hua could also see that C.I. Huey's words came from the bottom of her heart, and she did not hide anything. The first Buddhist expert that Xiao Hua met was Han Zhu. Han Zhu was a complete liar who tricked Xiao Hua miserably. Later on, Xiao Hua met a few more Buddhist disciples, and none of them left a good impression on him. Therefore, even the old monk who had just passed away was unable to completely change Xiao Hua's bad impression of the Buddhist sect. And at this time, C.I. Hui had just met him, and she was actually thinking so much for him, and was even distressed for him. This made Xiao Hua's heart vigilant. He didn't know what kind of medicine C.I. Hui was selling in her gourd. If I can understand the spirit in the Buddhist scriptures, even if I throw the Buddhist scriptures to the back of my head, I can still attain the fruit. C.I. Hui obviously didn't know what Xiao Hua was thinking. She still said, if you can't understand this spirit, then you should properly study the Buddhist scriptures and truly understand Buddha's great wish. Purely showing off and arguing, purely speaking words, you can only walk into a dead end. It can't even be considered a wrong path. Grandmaster, you're overstating things, right? Xiao Hua's heart gave birth to a sense of victory, as he said indifferently. C.I. Huey's face was still distressed. It seemed that every word Xiao Hua said made her heart ache. It was like a knife stabbing into her heart. Little monk, you don't need to say anymore. This poor monk will ask you 3 questions. You see if they are correct or not. C.I. Hui asked very regretfully. Grandmaster, please speak. Xiao Hua nodded. He wanted to see what this young monk wanted to say. Your Buddhist cultivation technique has made quite a bit of progress. If this poor monk is not wrong, I'm afraid that you have already reached the Rugi realm? Correct. What Grandmaster said is correct. Xiao Hua slightly frowned. He didn't want to answer, but after thinking for a moment, he still answered honestly. You have studied very few Buddhist scriptures, so much so that this poor monk feels that you may not have even read a single one. Xiao Hua's eyebrows twitched. Before today, he indeed hadn't read a single Buddhist scripture, but in this short moment, he had already read half of the Buddhist scriptures in his Naiwan palace. Xiao Hua looked at the woman who pursed her lips and smiled. He sighed and nodded. What Grandmaster said is correct. This is the 3rd question? C.I. Hui turned to look at the woman and said with a wry smile, this poor monk suspects that this little monk is not a Buddhist disciple of the Pure Land world. What? Xiao Hua was surprised and even more shocked. At the beginning, he spoke a bit slowly because he had adapted to the Pure Land world's language that was somewhat similar to the Sanskrit language. Now, he was already extremely proficient. He believed that it was impossible for others to see through his origin, but he didn't expect that C.I. Hui would still see through him. Therefore, Xiao Hua couldn't help but touch his nose and said with a wry smile, Grandmaster, what do you mean? Little monk. The woman smiled, as if she was playing a double act with C.I. Hui. Fellow Taoist, C.I. Hui means, you are just a monk who has just shaved his head. Even if you haven't heard of fellow Taoist C.I. Hui's Buddhist name before, after all, he is a senior of the C.I. generation. Look at your appearance. What Grandmaster? Do Buddhist disciples call their seniors like that? Also, where did you get your Tipfa name? As far as I know, there is no such generation in the Pure Land world. When Xiao Hua heard this, he already had an idea in his heart. He said with a smile, didn't Grandmaster C.I. Hui say it just now? This poor monk has never read any Buddhist scriptures and also doesn't know any Buddhist seniority. I had just shaved my head before the 2 of you came to the Great Snow Mountain. Grandmaster C.I. Hui looks so young, even younger than this poor monk. If it weren't for the 2 of you having great magical powers, this poor monk wouldn't have called him Grandmaster. Saying this, Xiao Hua glanced at the azure lion and the strange bird that stopped not far away. You don't need to say it. The bitterness on C.I. Hui's face didn't decrease. He looked at the old monk on the groove and asked, what is this elder's Buddhist name? This poor monk doesn't know. Xiao Hua shook his head. When this poor monk came, he had already asked, but the elder didn't answer. At the same time, he also didn't give this poor monk any Buddhist name. Tantric Buddhism. Oh, Tantric Buddhism. Ci Hui sighed. This poor monk doesn't know what to say. Tantric Buddhism has been around for so long. It's unlikely that they would pass on the Trader's Sutra to a little monk who has just entered the sect, right? If Grandmaster doesn't want to say it, then don't say it. Xiao Hua replied, wait until this poor monk incinerates the elder's body and takes out the elder's Sarira merit. You can start now. Ci Hui nodded. He took 2 steps forward and arrived in front of the wooden plank. He clasped his hands together and started to chant. His voice was very rhythmic. Although it wasn't loud, it clearly floated within 3 zhang, 33 m. Strands of Buddhist light were emitted from Ci Hui's body and slowly covered the old monk's body. Amitabha. Xiao Hua also chanted the rebirth mantra. He walked forward and lit the wooden plank with the oil lamp in his hand. The bright yellow flame on the wooden plank gradually rose and slowly wrapped around the old monk's corpse. Xiao Hua's heart was somewhat desolate. This old monk had bitterly guarded this place for nearly 100 years. In the end, only this ball of flame accompanied him. Everything else had turned into smoke and dust floating in the air. You can start now, little monk. Seeing that the flame was gradually growing bigger and Xiao Hua was still chanting with his head lowered, Ci Hui couldn't help but remind him. Start? Start what? Xiao Hua was greatly surprised. He stopped chanting and raised his head to look at Ci Hui. Ci Hui was stunned and blurted out, aren't you going to burn this elder's Sarira? Xiao Hua's heart jumped. He knew that things weren't good. He hurriedly let the Buddha Sarira flip through the Buddhist scriptures and Buddhist scriptures. He braced himself and said, after burning the elder's body, won't the Sarira naturally come out? Sigh. Let this poor monk do it. If we wait any longer, it will be too late. Ci Hui opened his mouth to explain, but looking at the flame, he could only pat his forehead. A Buddhist light flew out from the top of his head. Then his hands moved again. It was actually a Buddhist seal that Xiao Hua had never seen before. Little monk. The woman at the side was originally solemn with her head lowered. At this moment, she couldn't help but speak again. Sarira is the foundation of the cultivation of a Buddhist disciple. Presumably, little monk should also have a Sarira, right? These bodhisattvas would use a Buddhist mystic art to condense their negative karma and merit into their relic before they left. When the Buddhist fire burned their bodies, the negative karma would condense into the relic and fuse with it. The Sarira can protect the Buddhist disciple's karma in this life and prepare for the Buddhist disciple's cultivation in the next life. And this elder looks very old. I'm afraid he doesn't have any Buddhist cultivation and is just an ordinary monk. These monks can't condense their karma and merit. Therefore, even if they can use the Buddhist fire to create a Sarira, it will be melted bones and other things. Other than being a souvenir and for people to admire, it has no other use. If you want to keep their karma and merit, you can only rely on external forces. And this kind of external force. To be honest, fellow Taoist Ci Hui doesn't have this kind of divine ability. He can only create a Sarira. And this Sarira isn't that Sarira. Xiao Hua suddenly understood and said with a bitter smile, this poor monk really doesn't know. The woman glanced at Xiao Hua and shook her head slightly. Looks like you really don't know. You only have the cultivation of the Buddhist sect. While speaking, Ci Hui had already formed a seal with both hands. The Buddhist light emitted from his forehead condensed in the Buddhist seal, just like the 9 syllables mantra in Xiao Hua's mouth. Goal. Seeing the golden characters condense in the Buddhist seal, Ci Hui raised his hand and lightly scolded. The golden characters the size of a fist shone brightly and flew out from Ci Hui's hand. The brilliance of the golden characters was extremely bright. Xiao Hua unconsciously closed his eyes. And at this very moment, something strange happened. The old monk's body that was originally lying motionless on the wooden board suddenly moved. The old monk's closed eyes also opened. His turbid eyes looked at the sky blankly. But in just a moment, the Buddhist fire and the Buddhist light were reflected in his eyes. The old monk's orange peel-like face unexpectedly showed a rare kind of gratification and relaxation, as if he had put down a heavy burden. His lips trembled slightly. Looking at the shape of his mouth, it should be Southern Gate Methria Buddha. However, without waiting for the old monk to open his mouth, the Buddhist seal in C.I. Huey's hand had already expanded from the size of a fist to the size of one zhong, covering the entire groove at the foot of the mountain. Boom! On the wooden board, the Buddhist fire on the old monk's body flourished and unexpectedly turned into a pair of third-grade lotuses, completely submerging the old monk. The old monk smiled. The turbidity in his eyes unexpectedly disappeared, and a kind of clarity flashed. That relaxed smile and the satisfaction of getting what he wanted condensed on his face. Chapter 3406. After the lotus-shaped flame flourished, it turned into 3 balls of flame and gradually disappeared. At the moment when the 3 balls of flame were extinguished, a faint shadow flew out from one of the flames. It was the old monk's soul. The old monk respectfully bowed to C.I. Hui and said, "Amitabha, thank you, Venerable One." Immediately, the soul turned into thousands of fireflies and disappeared. Amitabha, seeing this, Xiao Hua was delighted in his heart. At the same time, he was also sincerely convinced. Just a moment ago, in front of the main hall of the Shaolin Long Temple, he used the Buddhist sect's 9 syllables mantra, but it didn't have the slightest effect. Here, C.I. Hui formed a Buddhist seal and immediately helped the old monk cross over. "Thank you, great master C.I. Hui." Xiao Hua happily bowed and said, "If great master didn't help, I'm afraid I would have disappointed the elder. The elder's relics and other things can't be left behind. Take this relic." Looking at the place where the old monk's soul just flew out, a relic smaller than a little finger appeared. C.I. Hui said with a bitter face, "He introduced you to Buddhism, so he should be your guide. His karma, if you have magical powers in the future, you should help him eliminate it. Of course, this poor monk can't guarantee whether or not there is any karma in this relic. Yes, this poor monk knows. This female benefactor has already explained it." Xiao Hua looked at the relic floating in the air. The color was very turbid, and there were many different colors inside. It wasn't particularly pure. Obviously, the old monk's cultivation realm wasn't very high. Xiao Hua waved his hand and was about to take the saraira. However, he had a thought and slowly walked over. He carefully picked it up with his hands and put it into his arms. After doing all this, he turned his head and asked C.I. Hui, "Great master, this little monk has a question. I don't know if I can ask you?" Hearing Xiao Hua call himself little monk, the bitter expression on C.I. Hui's face slightly disappeared. She nodded and said, "Monk, if you have something to say, please say it." The old monk has bitterly guarded the Great Snow Mountain, so he must be someone with a tenacious mind. Similarly, I've heard the old monk say that he has studied Buddhism for nearly 100 years, so why is his saraira not as sparkling and translucent as others? Xiao Hua naturally didn't hold back and immediately asked. Earlier, Nu Tanyua had already said that the eminent monk who has the secret technique of our Buddhism sect can refine the saraira that he has cultivated all his life before he goes to the West. The process of refining naturally has the effect of eliminating karma. When the karma is gone, the saraira will naturally look very good. C.I. Hui explained, "This elder does not practice mystic techniques and only studies Buddhist scriptures. He does not have the ability to condense his own negative karma. Therefore, it is not strange that the colors in the relic are mixed. However, for you, this kind of mixed color relic is the best. The old monk is your guide. Helping him get rid of his karma is what you should do. If you help him get rid of his negative karma, your merit will also increase. Even when you condense your golden body, his saraira can also be used. And in those saraira that have already been condensed, the simple negative karma has been eliminated. What is left is the heavy negative karma, which is not easy to remove. Even if you want to use it to condense your golden body, you have to be careful." Speaking of this, C.I. Hui was a little radiant. She said again, "As far as little monk knows, your Buddhism sect has already fallen to a lower level. Now in the Pure Land world, the Buddha Lord of my Lane Temple has passed down the Mahayana Buddhist scripture. Under this Mahayana Buddhist scripture, even an ordinary monk can condense Sarira. Little monk understands. Thank you for your guidance. Xiaohua didn't know what Mahayana Buddhist scripture was and what Hinayana Buddhist scripture was. He only slightly lowered his posture and then slightly muttered to himself as he prepared to say goodbye. But at this moment, there was a faint chanting sound in the distance. Then, a faint golden light flashed from the chanting and flew over the great snow mountain.
Oh.
Buddha's radiance illumination? Xia Hui raised her eyebrows and raised her hand. The green lotus that she had just put away in her left hand suddenly appeared. The green lotus also emitted a deep chanting sound and flashed with a Buddhist light that seemed to be breathing. Whoosh! Like a sword of light, a strand of Buddhist light emerged from the golden light and entered the green lotus. Then, the golden light and the chanting continued to fly forward. Xiaohua withdrew his gaze from the distant golden light and looked at the green lotus. He saw a Buddhist document that had already lost its Buddhist light and was quietly lying there. Xia Hui put away the green lotus, reached out her hand, and picked up the Buddhist edict. She opened it and looked at it, then handed it to Xiaohua and said, "Little monk, this Buddhist light shines through your big snow mountain. You are the only disciple of Tantric Buddhism here. You should accept this Buddhist edict."
Ah.
Buddhist decree? What do you mean? Xiaohua stared blankly, somewhat at a loss. Can this little monk not accept it? The Buddha's light illumination is the way the Lane Temple sends out the Buddha's decree to all the temples in the Pure Land world. Xia Hui was very patient and explained, wherever the Buddhist light passes, all the temples have to accept the Buddhist edict. You are a Buddhist disciple, naturally you have to accept it. But, speaking until here, Xia Hui was somewhat embarrassed. Xiaohua did not know how to accept the Buddhist light. Now, the Buddhist edict should be received by Xia Hui herself. Xiaohua not accepting it was not a big deal. There is no content. Xia Hui pondered a little and said, Buddha Lord has decreed that if possible, every temple in my Pure Land world must send 1 or 2 disciples to Chongqing Town in Hidden Immortal Continent. Xia Hang? Without waiting for Xiaohua to speak, that woman was suddenly startled. She narrowed her eyes and looked at Xia Hui. Xia Hui's eyes flashed with a somewhat complicated expression. She looked at that woman and nodded slightly, without saying anything. Your Buddha Lord is really good at scheming. That woman snorted coldly. Could it be that he really wants to build a 99-jong tall golden body of Namo Guanyin Bodhisattva in Chongqing Town? Ah? Xiaohua raised his eyebrows. His heart was overwhelmed with shock. Xia Hui shook her head. This poor monk does not know the Buddha Lord's plan. This poor monk is only a Buddhist disciple. If he does this... That woman opened her mouth, seemingly having a lot of complaints. However, when they reached her mouth, they turned into helplessness, leaving behind only a trace of hidden bitterness. I'm afraid it will cause a huge wave. Little monk, quickly accept this Buddhist edict. This poor monk still has something to say to you. Xia Hui did not dare to talk too much with that woman. She turned her head and passed the Buddhist edict to Xiaohua again. Xiaohua hurriedly waved his hand. Master, this little monk does not have the ability to accept this Buddhist edict. This is your divine ability. You should keep it for yourself. This little monk will go back and recite scriptures in front of the Buddha. Puffed. That woman could not help but laugh. She looked at Xia Hui and said, Fellow Dawa Xia Hui, you really made an unnecessary move. Forget it. Xia Hui looked at Xiaohua's shrinking appearance. Obviously, he was not prepared to accept the Buddhist edict. She smiled bitterly and said, Since you are not willing to accept it, this poor monk can only leave this Buddhist edict behind. Of course, you are the only monk in this snowy mountains temple. Moreover, you have just shaved your head. According to the Buddhist edict, you do not need to go to the longevity town. It is good that Master knows, Xiaohua said with a smile. However, at this point, Xia Hui changed the topic and said, However, this poor monk still has something to discuss with you. If master wants to go to that place, then it is better not to mention it. Xiao Hua hurriedly waved his hand, not giving Ci Hui the opportunity to speak. However, Xiao Hua still underestimated Ci Hui's persistence. Ci Hui did not even look at Xiao Hua's waving hand and said, "You have the root of wisdom. Moreover, when you shaved your head, there was a Buddhist vision. In the future, you will definitely be a pillar of my Buddhist sect. If you had a monk by your side to guide your cultivation, this poor monk would not say anything. After all, Tantric Buddhism is different from the other 12 sections. However, in the current situation, although you have entered my Buddhist sect, there is no one to guide you in cultivation. You are still in the same situation as before. You only have Buddhist divine abilities, but not the protection of my Buddhist sect's dharma. You should know that Buddha is 1 foot tall, and the devil is 10 feet tall. Your cultivation is very easy to go astray. It is like a child with great strength holding a great killing weapon. If you are not careful, you will hurt others and also hurt yourself. This poor monk has also suffered a great loss before. Therefore, this poor monk does not dare to say that he is your senior. This poor monk only wants to ask you to follow this poor monk. This poor monk will tell you what he has learned." Ci Hui's face was still somewhat bitter. Seeing this, Xiao Hua's heart warmed. In fact, Xiao Hua thought that if he did not accept the Buddhist edict just now, Ci Hui could use it to threaten him. Ci Hui could even use the name of a senior to ask him to follow. Of course, just now, Ci Hui could also use the opportunity of refining the old monk Saraira to raise conditions for Xiao Hua. However, Ci Hui simply ignored these opportunities. She only used a pleading tone to speak to Xiao Hua. She spoke very sincerely, as if she was an old friend who had known Xiao Hua for a long time and wanted to ask Xiao Hua for help. Xiao Hua had always been amenable to coaxing but not coercion. Now that he heard it, he could not help but secretly ponder. In fact, what Xiao Hua was worried about now was that he did not want Ci Hui and that woman to know his Dao sect cultivation. He did not want them to know his identity as Dao sect's Xiao Hua. As for what the two of them were planning, Xiao Hua was not afraid. Even if the two of them were nascent soul cultivators, Xiao Hua's Dao sect cultivation had completely recovered, and he had even advanced to nascent soul. Even if he could not beat them, escaping would not be a problem. Speaking of Yuanying realm being unstable, this was indeed Xiao Hua's misgivings. However, Xiao Hua's situation was different from others. Others only had one primordial spirit. If they wanted to stabilize their realm, they could only meditate. However, Xiao Hua had many primordial spirits. Any one of them could replace Xiao Hua in meditating. Even if the green-robed Xiao Hua entered the Yuanying realm, the effect would be better than Xiao Hua's. Furthermore, stabilizing one's realm was a gradual process. Xiao Hua had just advanced to nascent soul a few days ago, and there was no situation where his Dao foundation was unstable. He did not necessarily have to cultivate in seclusion. Traveling to the Pure Land was not necessarily a bad thing. At least he could see what the so-called Pure Land was like. The only thing that Xiao Hua was afraid of was time. He had to pass through as much as possible before the space meridian collapsed and return to the hidden immortal continent as soon as possible. After all, the matter of Jiang country's recovery had just begun, and there would definitely be many places where he would need to appear. After thinking for a while, Xiao Hua raised his head and said, "This little monk thanks Master for his kind intentions. This little monk wants to ask, where are you going? What do you need this little monk to do? How long will it take?" Chapter 30, 407. This, Ci Hui hesitated slightly, looked at the woman, and said in a low voice, "This matter, please explain it to me. Actually, it won't take much time. We're going to pay a visit to an expert from the Dao sect. If we can ask him to help, that would be for the best. I don't need to do anything, I just need to listen to immortal Ci Hui's teachings." The woman had already thought this through and spoke without hesitation. If that expert from the Dao sect is unwilling to go, we may need to borrow a Dharma treasure from him. When that time comes, I will support that Dharma treasure. Little monk, you may need to use your golden body to exert some strength. How long will it take? Xiao Hua frowned. 1 month should be enough. The woman saw that Xiao Hua was a bit impatient, so she raised her eyebrows and replied indifferently. Xiao Hua muttered to himself for a moment. He knew that there shouldn't be any problems in a month's time. After all, when he checked earlier, the spatial meridian didn't show any obvious signs of collapse. However, Xiao Hua still said cautiously, "Master, if you want me to go, I have 2 conditions." "Hee hee, you little monk." The woman pointed at Xiao Hua and said, "Others can't follow Immortal Ci Hui even if they want to. Now that Immortal Ci Hui has taken the initiative to find you, it seems like he's begging you." "No matter, little monk, just say it. This is what I'm begging you," Ci Hui said indifferently. "I can go with Master, but if I feel that it's dangerous, I can leave immediately." Xiao Hua said in all seriousness, "My cultivation is limited and can't be compared to the 2 of you." "Of course. How could there be danger?" Ci Hui and the woman spoke at almost the same time. The woman was clearly a bit displeased. Xiao Hua ignored the woman's reaction and said, "The second condition is that I want to ask if Master knows Jinshan Temple's Silent Void Zen Master?" Jinshan Temple's Silent Void Zen Master? Ci Hui was slightly stunned. She didn't know why Xiao Hua mentioned Silent Void. She nodded and said, "Of course I know. Why are you looking for him? I've heard Silent Void Zen Master's teachings before and have some friendship with him. If you have something, I can tell you. Yes, even if you want to become his disciple." "It's nothing." This little monk has been repeatedly instructed by the old monk that there are some matters that I need to discuss with Still Void Great Zen Master. Great Zen Master only needs to tell this little monk the location of Jinshan Temple. How could Xiao Hua tell the truth? Ci Hui smiled. What's so difficult about that? He then explained the location of Jinshan Temple and said, "If possible, this poor monk can go with you to visit the Great Zen Master." Thank you so much, Grandmaster." Xiao Hua smiled and bowed. "Since that's the case, can you come with us?" the woman urged. Xiao Hua looked at the wooden planks and other objects that had already turned into ashes, as well as the newly added fire marks on the grooves. He sighed and said, "Please wait for a moment. This little monk will return to the temple to take a look. If there's nothing missing, I'll immediately return with you too. Little monk, come back quickly." She waved her hand, and the strange bird in the distance let out a long cry and flew over to the woman. The woman floated onto the bird, and the strange bird spread its wings and flew up into the sky, waiting quietly. Seeing the woman leave, clouds appeared under Xiao Hua's feet, and he also flew towards Xiao Ling Long Temple. Looking at Xiao Hua's departing figure, Ci Hui thought for a moment. Then she also flew onto the Azure Lion. Buddha clouds appeared under the Azure Lion's feet, and it landed beside the woman. Seeing Ci Hui fly over, the woman couldn't help but grumble. "Immortal friend Ci Hui, didn't you say before that we would come over to take a look? Why are there so many problems? Is this little monk called Zhu Tepu worthy of your attention?" "Immortal friend," Ci Hui sat on the Azure Lion and said with a smile, "My Buddhist sect emphasizes karma the most. Since we encountered a Buddhist phenomenon here, then this Buddha must be related to this poor monk. Look at this little monk's sharp aura. It's exactly the same as this poor monk in the past. This poor monk really can't bear to see him walk the wrong path like this poor monk. Everyone has their own path, that little monk is right," the woman said somewhat disdainfully. "Your path isn't his path. You can't walk the path for him, and you can't hinder him from walking his own path. But if he has someone else's guidance, at least he won't walk the wrong path." Ci Hui didn't mind and said with a smile, "Moreover, didn't you see that he also knows the cloud writing technique? Your cultivation as a Confucian cultivator should be of some use in that place. This little monk is somewhat mysterious." When the woman heard Ci Hui mention Xiao Hua's Confucian cultivation, she slightly frowned. "Not only did he not call you senior, he also didn't call me senior, and I can't sense what grade his Confucian cultivation has truly reached." "This is karma." Ci Hui nodded. "Perhaps this time, We'll need his help when we go to that place. I hope so. The woman slightly nodded, a faint sadness appearing in her eyes. He's here. While speaking, Xiao Hua's figure flew out from the foothills, and Cai Hui said with a smile, he didn't ask about this matter before, but now that we're going together, we'll definitely have to explain it to him. That's natural. The woman said with a smile, there's nothing to hide about this matter. Since he's going, we'll naturally have to explain it to him. At this point, the woman frowned. The little monk doesn't seem to have a mount. You'll have to take care of him. Of course. I can't let you take care of him. Cai Hui smiled and patted the indigo lion to Xiao Hua's side. Seeing the strange bird and the indigo lion flying over, Xiao Hua raised his voice. Master, this little monk can go now. But before we go, shouldn't you explain to this little monk where we're going? Of course, of course. Cai Hui said with a smile. I've already told fellow Taoist Xian about this matter, and asked her to explain it to you. Xian? Xiao Hua frowned, and immediately thought of Princess Bai Hua, Xian, and said to himself, why are they both surnamed Xian? Could it be related to this woman, and by new country? However, Xiao Hua still smiled. Please explain, fellow Taoist Xian. It's nothing much, I'll explain as we walk. Xian looked at Xiao Hua, and didn't show any displeasure because of Xiao Hua's disrespect, and said, moreover, if it's convenient, I feel that this little monk should change into a monk's robe. This tantric monk's robe really doesn't look pleasing to the eye. That's true. Tantric disciples rarely walk in the Pure Land world. This little monk will attract a lot of attention. Cai Hui also nodded, and asked, little monk, if you don't have an extra monk's robe, this poor monk has an extra one here. Xiao Hua touched his nose, looked at the monk's robe on Cai Hui's body, then looked at his own yellow monk's robe, and said readily, if that's the case, then that's for the best. This little monk doesn't want to be stared at by others. Immediately after, Xiao Hua took the monk's robe from Cai Hui and caught up with Xian again. After hearing about the place she was going to, Xiao Hua sat on the indigo lion's butt and followed the two people into the distance. In just the time it took to eat a meal, Xian had already explained the matter, but the more Xiao Hua listened, the more he frowned. Because according to Xian, she was going to invite Cai Hui and a Tao sect cultivator by the name of Heaven Flipping Venerable to a secret place. This place was passed down from ancient times, and it was there before the Confucian cultivators and Buddhist sect joined hands to destroy the Tao sect. Moreover, this secret place was left behind by the Tao sect, and there were formations set up by the experts of the Tao sect, and there were even monsters that the Confucian cultivators and Buddhist sect didn't know about. What shocked Xiao Hua the most was that Xian wanted to go to this place for an immortal tool. Yes, that's right, an immortal tool that only immortals can use. As for Xian's identity, Xian didn't mention it, and Xiao Hua also asked, but Xian just smiled and didn't answer. Looking at Xian riding the strange bird, Xiao Hua sat on the indigo lion's butt and fell into deep thought. From Xian's words, Xiao Hua faintly smelled the scent of a conspiracy. Because whether it was Xian's identity, the secret place, or the immortal tool, they all gave Xiao Hua a kind of uneasy feeling. In the Dawn Rain continent, Xiao Hua also encountered this kind of thing, and it seemed that every matter had a bad ending, and every bad ending made Xiao Hua feel like he had a narrow escape from death. Immortal tool, a magic tool used by immortals, Xiao Hua had never heard of it before in the Dawn Rain continent. Although Xiao Hua could already refine spirit tools, and he also knew the power of spirit tools, but he never dared to imagine the power and appearance of magic tools used by immortals. This Xian was obviously a Confucian cultivator, so how did she know this secret place? Why didn't she have any scruples about looking for that immortal tool? Great Master Cai Hui. Xiao Hua pondered for a long time, but he didn't have any plans, so he could only open his eyes and ask, Immortal friend Xian, what is her identity? You actually followed her to look for the immortal tool. Aren't you afraid of falling into her trap? At this time, Cai Hui didn't take out the green lotus and sword, but quietly sat cross-legged in front of Xiaohua. Hearing Xiaohua's words, she slightly leaned to the side and said with a smile, "This poor monk also doesn't know what identity immortal friend Xian has. This poor monk met her for the first time in Qingluan Mountain 70 years ago, and then we met a few more times. Although she was a Confucian cultivator, she didn't have any prejudice against my Buddhist sect, and we talked very happily, so we could be considered old friends. A few years ago, she sent a message to this poor monk, saying that she had a big discovery and wanted to invite this poor monk. This poor monk naturally gladly agreed. Because she wanted to make some preparations, she pushed it to these few days. As for the immortal tool, I only heard about it a few days ago. That thing is a Tao sect cultivator's treasure and has nothing to do with my Buddhist sect's disciples, so this poor monk only wanted to remind her. Since immortal friend Xian is already prepared, how about this poor monk accompany her? It's that simple? Xiaohua was a bit flabbergasted. This CI Hui seemed to be too unguarded, right? She didn't even know Xian's origin, yet she followed her and even pulled him in. Looking at CI Hui, Xiaohua was a bit suspicious whether this young monk was deliberately pulling him down. Chapter 3408. Looking at Xiaohua's puzzled gaze, CI Hui smiled and said, "Little monk, sometimes you can't think too clearly about the matters of the world. If you think too clearly, you won't be able to do anything. This poor monk only knows that he is a Buddhist disciple and has no interest in that so-called immortal tool. And fellow Taoist Xian only invited this poor monk to help her break the formation. As for other matters, this poor monk really doesn't want to ask too much." The problem is, Xiaohua was flustered and exasperated. "Master, why are you pulling this little monk? This little monk still wants to cultivate in the temple." Xiaohua was so anxious that he almost called the Xiao out. CI Hui was still neither fast nor slow as she said indifferently, "Little monk, is this your plan? No matter how this poor monk looks at it, you don't look like a Buddhist disciple who can cultivate peacefully? Then tell me, what is a Buddhist disciple who cultivates peacefully like?" Xiaohua rolled his eyes and asked in a bad mood. "At the very least, you have to respectfully call other people senior. At the very least, you have to humbly ask other people about things you don't understand. At the very least, you have to get used to chanting scriptures under the lamp." Without waiting for CI Hui to finish speaking, Xiaohua waved his hand and said, "Senior, isn't it just a senior? What's so difficult about it?" Before this little monk entered Buddhism, this little monk didn't call other people senior. Since you are a monk, then you have to be less impetuous, more steady, less suspicious, and more trusting. CI Hui smiled cheerfully and said, "Since you are a Buddhist disciple, this poor monk won't ignore it. Whether you are from Tantric Buddhism, strict flower school, or other sects, this poor monk has the responsibility to properly guide you." Sigh, forget it. Xiaohua was speechless. Why did these words sound like he was reprimanding Xiao Jian? Now that karma came out of CI Hui's mouth, it actually made him seem so mischievous. However, thinking about how other things can be used to improve Jade and how his Buddhist skills were not small, Xiaohua could only lower his head. Seeing Xiaohua admit defeat, CI Hui smiled and said, "Let's not talk about other things. This poor monk just saw the Buddhist phenomenon." Then, CI Hui began to talk about the Great Snow Mountain with Xian. She narrated the contents of the Buddhist scriptures, the illusions, and her experience. Moreover, there was a trace of the way of karma hidden in her narration. Xiaohua didn't care at first, but as he listened, Xiaohua's ears perked up. In the end, Xiaohua also interjected from time to time. The two were actually debating. The hidden immortal continent was different from the Dawn Rain continent. Whether it was Confucian cultivators, Buddhist cultivators, or demons, the cultivation methods were all different. Although there were some methods to distinguish the cultivation level of each other, most of the time this method could not be taken seriously. Even pressure, primordial thought, divine thought, and Buddhist awareness could not be used as the standard to measure the cultivation level of a person or a demon. The only way to test the cultivation level was to compete. Therefore, Xiaohua did not have an estimate of CI Hui and Xian's strength. Similarly, the two of them also did not have an estimate of Xiaohua's strength. especially Ci Hui. She could not perceive the depth of Buddhist cultivation level from Xiaohua at all. However, even though Xiaohua called himself a little monk, his bearing was so calm. It was very obvious that his strength was not inferior to her and Xian's. In fact, just from the fact that she could not perceive Xiaohua's Buddhist cultivation level, Ci Hui already knew that if Xiaohua did not have a trace of Buddhist cultivation level, then he had strength that surpassed her. Although Xiaohua kept saying that he had just entered the Buddhist sect, entering the Buddhist sect and having Buddhist cultivation level were two different things. Xiaohua obviously belonged to the latter. And for Xiaohua, a Buddhist disciple who knew Buddhist cultivation level but did not understand Buddhist doctrine, how could Ci Hui not have the idea of feeding the tiger with her body? Wanting to rely on her earnest advice to let the Pure Land world have another Buddha with profound Buddhist doctrine and outstanding Buddhist techniques. Not to mention Ci Hui breaking down Buddhist doctrine for Xiaohua, and not to mention Xian urging the strange bird to fly in front of them. The mountain range below the three of them overlapped one after another. Let's talk about a secluded place in front of the three of them, which was currently bustling with noise and excitement. This was a foothill that was flourishing with flowers. For mountain peaks that were like weights poked out of the sea of flowers. The mountain peaks were also covered with green pines and green cypresses. The sounds of apes and birds chirping could be heard from time to time from the mountain peaks. Moreover, a burst of fog was like a veil swaying in the wind, gradually covering the entire mountain peaks. However, in just a moment, rays of sunlight were cast down from the thick clouds. It was like a huge light sword piercing through the fog. The fog rolled and rolled, revealing the mountain peaks and rocks. The sunlight passed through the fog and shone on the mountain stream. The mountain stream looked very deep, but a stream of mountain spring gushed out from various parts of the mountain stream, emitting a gurgling sound. It was like the weeping of a woman alone in her boudoir, but also like the flute playing by a Confucian scholar's lips. With great difficulty, the sunlight fell on the mountain stream's spring water. The mountain rocks in the spring water were rugged, shattering the golden light. Bits and pieces of crystal scattered on the surface of the water, making people feel intoxicated. The spring water gurgled as it fell into the mountain stream and converged into a pool. The pool water was long, and there were duckweeds floating in it. Occasionally, one or two small fish with silver-white bellies would happily swim out from the depths of the pool. They drew two light lines on the surface of the pool before suddenly disappearing. The pool was located in the depths of the mountain stream, and the sunlight couldn't reach it. If the clouds didn't block the sunlight, wisps of water vapor mixed with white mist would seep out from the four walls of the mountain stream at some point in time, covering the pool as well. Seeing the mist that was as ethereal as immortal clouds appear, an old man in a green Taoist robe suddenly appeared on a protruding stone wall at the top of the pool. This old man's hair and beard were all white, and his face was thin. His eyes were slightly closed, but the two palms outside of his Taoist robe were abnormally white. Although he was very thin, the veins on his skin were clearly visible, like the veins of jade. Gu. The moment the old man in the Taoist robe appeared, he slightly opened his mouth and let out a toad-like cry. Then, the white fog and water vapor above the pond rushed into his mouth like a waterfall. In a moment, the entire mountain stream was devoid of water vapor, revealing the dark green pond from before.
Pooh.
The old man in the Taoist robe did not stop. He patted his forehead, and a dragon-shaped brilliance rushed out from the top of his head. After the brilliance, a mist mixed with water droplets also roared into the sky, like a real dragon sitting cross-legged above the mountain stream. Go! After a moment, the old man in the Taoist robe opened his eyes and recited a mantra. The dragon-shaped mist suddenly stopped and instantly turned into thousands of water droplets that fell down, hitting the stone wall and the pond. Alas! Water vapor convergence. Water vapor convergence. The old man in the Taoist robe looked at the water droplets that turned into mist. He sighed and said to himself, "This old man has already cultivated the water vapor convergence, but why can't I understand the meaning of this water vapor convergence?" Is it possible that the water-vapor convergence of Confucian cultivators has another essence? Is there a mystery that this old man doesn't know? This is impossible. The Liao family's cultivation method may have a problem, but the Songlong River's cultivation method can't have a problem, right? Their cultivation methods are similar with only minor differences. But since the cultivation method is correct, this old man's cultivation method also has no problem? Why doesn't this water-vapor convergence have any special power? As the old man spoke, he waved his hand and a 2-foot-long nascent soul came out of the old man's head. The nascent soul was wearing a treasure armor and was holding a ruler that was a few inches long. The ruler gave off a cold, blue light. As soon as the old man's nascent soul appeared, it immediately threw the ruler in its hand. Its 2 small hands rubbed slightly. A blue brilliance emerged from the nascent soul's hand. As the nascent soul waved its hand, the blue brilliance fell into the deep pool. Buzz! A burst of roaring sound came from the pool. The entire pool swelled up as if the whole pool was boiling. The nascent soul opened its eyes. Its starry eyes flashed with a green brilliance. Then the nascent soul raised its hand. The entire pool of water rushed out like a giant python. It was 100 times more arrogant than the water vapor and mist from before. Boom! With a loud sound, the pool of water hit the stone wall. The entire stone wall turned into powder, and half of the stone wall shook slightly. Then, like a child playing, the nascent soul controlled the huge anaconda to dance around the mountain stream and the mountain peak. Wherever the anaconda passed, whether it was the tough mountain rocks or the thick trees, they were all turned into powder. Occasionally, the birds that flew over the mountain stream were also crushed by the anaconda and turned into blood foam. AI. Seeing the water python's power, the old man's nascent soul didn't rejoice. Instead, he sighed and muttered to himself in a sharp voice, "Our Dao Sect's simple spell is more powerful than water essence convergence. Why was our Dao Sect destroyed by Confucian cultivators?" That bullshit water vapor convergence is regarded as a classic by countless Confucian families, but in this old man's eyes, it is so childish and laughable. The old man's nascent soul seemed to be very depressed. It withdrew its hand, and the blue brilliance disappeared. The nascent soul sitting in the old man's hair also withdrew into the old man's body. Woo! It was as if thousands of waterfalls were pouring down. The water that was still raging in midair suddenly fell from midair. Not only did it cause the trees around the mountain stream to sway, even the water droplets splashed up from the mountain stream were comparable to a rainstorm. Just as the old man's nascent soul disappeared and he opened his eyes, a powerful divine sense swept across the sky and the mountain before landing on the old man's body. Who is it? The moment the old man sensed the divine sense, it was as if he had been bitten by a poisonous snake. He immediately flew up from the rock and ignored the water vapor that still covered the mountain stream. His face was filled with extreme shock as he looked at the source of the divine sense in disbelief and shouted, Who else could it be? Naturally, it's this old man." A thunderous voice came from the horizon. Chapter 30, 409. You. Who are you? The old man seemed to be unfamiliar with this voice and asked with a trembling voice. Then he clapped his hand without hesitation and a fist-sized, dark green spider appeared in his hand. Puff! The old man opened his mouth and a ray of blue light landed on the spider. The spider suddenly grew until it was several dozen feet long. At the same time the spider transformed, the old man's body also emitted a brilliance. When the old man landed on the spider's back, wisps of water vapor flew out from the spider's body. Like a fountain, they shot high into the air and landed on the mountain ridges around the mountain stream. Swoosh! Gently, like the sound of water. Where the water vapor landed, streaks of water-blue brilliance spread out in all directions. In just a short moment, the 4 mountains that were like weights were covered by the water-blue brilliance. From a distance, this blue light looked like a spider web, and the spider under the old man was the owner of this web. Little heaven-flipping brat, you're still so cowardly. You're just as the others said. There was no trace of the voice. Even though the old man spread his divine sense out for several hundred kilometers, he still couldn't see anything. However, this voice was so arrogant that it seemed to be right next to the old man. The old man's face became a bit ugly, and he coldly shouted, "Which celestial friend has come to visit my four-flat mountain? Since you're here, don't be so sneaky. Otherwise, don't blame this old man for not giving you face." "Ha ha ha, this old man wants to come. Do I still need you to give me face?" The voice laughed loudly, causing the blue light to tremble. "Rise." The old man sneered and waved his hand. A water-blue brilliance rushed forward and turned into a flying sword of more than 100 feet in size. With a woo sound, it swept across the air. Although it didn't hit anything, the spiritual chi of heaven and earth exploded in the space of about 100 feet. The momentum was extremely vast. "Haha, little guy, this old man hasn't arrived yet. Why are you wasting your spiritual energy like this?" The voice still had a hint of mockery as it arrogantly laughed. "Could it be that you're welcoming this old man?" The old man in the Taoist robe bit his lip and spread out his divine sense. He was very cautious as he looked around. He didn't believe the words of this voice. Rumble. In less than half a cup of tea's time, the sound of rolling wind and thunder could be heard from the horizon. A group of gray clouds emerged from that place and flew toward the mountain stream with lightning speed. The old man in the Taoist robe looked at the cloud in disbelief. He quickly spread out his divine sense to see what was inside the cloud. However, just as his divine sense touched the cloud, an irresistible force came from the cloud and tore his divine sense apart.
Ah!
The old man in the Taoist robe let out a miserable scream and quickly retracted his divine sense. His originally shocked face was now as white as snow. "Ha! Just you, a nascent soul cultivator. You dare to spy on this old man?" The voice like rumbling thunder came from the gray cloud. Who are you?" The old man in the Taoist robe stomped on the spider, and a green light surrounded the old man. Only then did he gnash his teeth and shout. As he spoke, the gray cloud had already arrived next to the four mountains. The cloud violently churned, and the face of a young man appeared in the air. The mouth formed by the cloud opened, as if it wanted to devour the four mountains. He said, "You don't need to know who this old man is. Even if this old man told you my name, you might not know it. All you need to know is that this old man is a Taoist cultivator, and you are a disciple of my Taoist sect. This old man is naturally a disciple of the Taoist sect, but this old man doesn't want to interact with other Taoist sect disciples. This old man only wants to cultivate in peace. Although fellow Taoist is a senior of my Taoist sect, you can't force me to do something I don't want to do." The old man in the Taoist robe wasn't afraid at all. He looked at the face formed by the cloud and coldly spoke. Since this old man was suppressed in the eye of the West Ocean, how did the Taoist sects of the 3 continents become so cowardly?" The face formed by the gray cloud snorted. "There are simply too many cowards like you. You only care about your own cultivation and never care about the lives of others. You hide the arrogant heads of our Taoist sect in your turtle shells. This is why those immature scholars of the Confucian sects and those shameless monks of the Buddhist sects can trample our Taoist sect under their feet. If you all had a strong heart, our Taoist sect wouldn't have fallen to this state. You. When the old man in the Taoist robe heard this, he was first stunned, and then, as if he had been struck by lightning, he stood there in a daze. He looked at the cloud with absolute astonishment and said, "You," several times. However, in the end, he didn't dare to call out this person's name. It was clear that this person's name was extremely famous, and he absolutely didn't dare to call out his name. I didn't think that after all these years, this old man's name is still so famous. Fantion brat, it seems like this old man found the right person to look for you today." The clouds seemed to be frozen in midair. Although there were gusts of wind, it couldn't blow away a single strand of cloud. The voice that was like rolling thunder was heard again, and arrogantly. "Since you know who this old man is, there's no need to call out my name. The South Continent is the territory of that old monk. He has cultivated the 6 Buddhist divine abilities to the extreme. It's not easy for this old man to take the risk to come here. If you call out my name, that old monk might hear it. Hearing this, the old man named Fantion bit his lips slightly. His expression was uncertain as he stared at the cloud. No one knew what he was thinking. However, a moment later, a trace of mockery appeared on the old man's face. He let out a cold snort and said, "Senior, no matter who you are or why you're here, I'm not interested at all. In my eyes, there's only cultivation and the heavenly Tao. It's my luck to be able to enter the Taoist sect, but everything in the Taoist sect has nothing to do with me. The rise and fall of the Taoist sect isn't something I can influence, nor is it something you can decide. There's no need for you to say anything more. If you don't have anything else to say, please forgive me. I'm going to cultivate." After he finished speaking, the old man cupped his hands towards the clouds. Then, his body flashed with a blue brilliance as he descended towards the mountain peak below. Ha ha ha. The cloud didn't seem to be angry, and only laughed wildly. When this old man roamed the 3 continents, you weren't even born yet. You probably know my name, but you don't know my temper, right? To tell the truth, if it was in the past, this old man would immediately kill you because of what you said. Not to mention a mere nascent soul cultivator like you, even astral and spirit-severing cultivators have to be respectful when they see this old man. However, since the Taoist sect has withered and you're a rare nascent soul cultivator in the 3 continents, this old man will tolerate you for a moment. What can you do? The old man seemed to be absent-minded and turned a deaf ear to the cloud's words. His body quickly sank into the blue light and gradually disappeared. Damn it. When the cloud saw that the old man didn't listen to its orders and was on guard against it, it let out a roar of anger. The entire cloud was like a fountain in a mountain stream and violently swelled. Strands of cloud flowed up and down and quickly expanded. Gray light flickered and turned into black and white at the center of the cloud. The white light soared into the sky, and the black light fell. In just a moment, the cloud that was only several tens of feet in size had expanded to several acres in size. Although it wasn't enough to completely cover the 4 mountains, the dark cloud's overbearing aura seemed to have substance as it charged towards the blue light between the 4 mountains. Looking at the water-blue brilliance again, it didn't show any weakness. After the old man in the Taoist robe disappeared, rays of brilliance overflowed from the 4 mountain peaks. The water-blue brilliance surged and roared like real waves. In a short moment, the water light under the clouds actually rose several zhang high. Moreover, as the water waves surged, the rhythm of the water light released by the 4 mountains gradually became consistent. Under the splendor of the water waves, a whirlpool as thick as a bowl was formed under the impact of the intense water light. Whoa! A sound that was even louder than the sound of flowing water came from these vortexes. A huge current of air descended from the sky, and the world's origin energy within several tens of kilometers of the surrounding mountains rushed into these vortexes. As if the wind was helping the waves, the light that was several tens of feet in height rose up once more and soared several tens of feet into the air. Haka? Heaven flipping brat, is this your rippling flood peak formation? From within the cloud, an arrogant voice filled with disdain sounded. It was like the ringing of a golden bell. You're truly a disgrace to my Taoist sect. Can you not use such fancy things? Although your water light looks extremely powerful, in reality, it has already broken down its power. If you meet a strong enemy, they will be able to destroy your weakness in one move. Your water light looks like gold on the outside, but it's rotten on the inside. Wang Wang. The old man in the Taoist robe didn't reply. However, the tens of thousands of vortexes in the blue light began to vibrate. Before the voice could drift into the distance, the light that was mixed with the thin threads of white light rushed out from the vortexes. Tens of thousands of light pillars condensed into a light pillar that was several tens of acres in size and brazenly attacked the clouds that were also surging towards the ground. The light pillar's power was so great that the hissing sounds between the tens of thousands of small light pillars resounded throughout the world. Ha ha ha. Interesting. It seems like you still have some tricks up your sleeve. That old voice was still laughing loudly as if he did not care about such a powerful attack. Sure enough, at the origin of the voice, wisps of pitch-black cloud threads reached down from the cloud layer like densely packed tentacles, welcoming the enormous light pillar. Before the pitch-black cloud threads could come into contact with the light pillar, more completely white cloud threads followed closely behind the black cloud threads and rushed out. Wisps followed by wisps, appearing very strange as they descended. Chapter 30, 410. Woo-woo. When the light pillar collided with the cloud pillar, it didn't cause a huge wave. Instead, the sound waves that surged between heaven and earth suddenly disappeared, as if something had blocked the source of the sound. Looking at the light pillar that was as bright as a morning star, it seemed to be covered by dark clouds, or even polluted by cloud threads. The black cloud threads first touched the light pillar that was as thick as a bowl, then quickly spread downwards, annihilating the light pillar's aqua-blue brilliance. In particular, the weak cloud threads seemed to have the power of 10,000 caddies. When the light pillar's powerful attack came into contact with the cloud threads, it was blocked and couldn't advance even half an inch. The old man in the Taoist robe was slightly shocked. Then, the aqua-blue brilliance at the 4 mountain peaks flourished again. However, before the brilliance of the 4 mountain peaks could form a whirlpool to assist in the battle, the white strands of cloud rushed into the pitch-black strands of cloud, instantly dyeing the top of the gigantic light pillar into a grayish-white color. Schwa! Like the sound of a clear spring washing away sand and dust, or like millions of young silkworms swallowing mulberry leaves, layer after layer of sound filled the sky. Looking at the light pillar that had just been covered, it instantly collapsed, inch by inch, foot by foot, and foot by foot. It turned into nothingness. Strangely, the light pillar wasn't completely destroyed, but was instead sucked into the gray cloud threads. In a moment, the cloud threads grew bigger and thicker. This. The old man in the Taoist robe turned pale with fright. What method is this? Kaka, my Taoist sex methods are heaven-defying. How could a nascent soul cultivator, like you know? The arrogant voice sounded from the clouds again. This old man has only recovered 10 to 20%. It's more than enough to subdue you. Senior, the old man in the Taoist robe was only dazed for a moment. Then he said coldly, Senior is my Taoist sex teacher, and I also know that Senior has been suppressed by Confucian and Buddhist cultivators for tens of thousands of years. No matter what, it's still a meritorious service to my Taoist sect, so I didn't dare to use my full strength for fear of hurting Senior. Just now, I've already made my thoughts clear. I only want to cultivate quietly, comprehend the will of heaven, and feel the will of the earth, and walk on the great path of Taoist cultivation. I don't want to participate in the battle between Taoists and Buddhists. Ha ha ha, heaven-flipping brat. That voice sounded like it had descended 10 feet into the clouds and was much louder. When the nest is overturned, there are no eggs left intact. Do you really believe in the benevolence of the Buddhist monks? Their benevolence is for those who are loyal to them. Even if they were to give a portion to those demons, they would never give it to us Tao sect disciples. Don't think that those hypocrites will let you go just because you fled to the pure land of ultimate bliss and the hidden immortal continent. Don't think that those old bald donkeys of the Buddhist sect will tolerate you if you stay in the 4 Extremes Mountains. Your actions would be laughable in the eyes of others, and your thoughts would be childish in the eyes of others. You are only a nascent soul cultivator now. Wait until you reach a higher level of enlightenment and reach the leaving aperture stage. Then, let's see what those old bald donkeys are capable of. Do you know what it means to subdue demons? Do you know what Thunderbolt Wrist is? You will be the devil in the future. You will be the monster under the Thunderbolt Wrist. At this point, the voice could not help but sigh. Back then, didn't I have the same thoughts as you? I thought that as long as I cultivated a supreme divine ability, I would be able to lead the 3 continents and revive our Tao sect. However, I was wrong. Although a single person's strength can reach the heavens, there is more than one person who can reach the heavens. That is why it is difficult to do things alone. Before I could cultivate to the great success stage, the Confucian cultivators and the Buddhist sect found out about me. Even the 1,000 demons' sacred realm intervened.
I,
I don't want to talk about the specific details, but I believe there are many legends about me in the 3 continents. Therefore, when I escape this time, the first thing I want to do is to recover my cultivation. The second thing I want to do is to unite the Tao sect cultivators of the 3 continents. I want to gather all the strength of our Tao sect to fight against the Confucian cultivators and the Buddhist sect. As long as the Tao sect rises, I will be able to reach the great success stage. Only when I reach the great success stage can the Tao sect rise. As the voice came out of the clouds like a gust of wind, the black and white clouds of the devouring light pillar slowed down. Rather than saying that it was devouring, it was more like a deterrent to the Tao sect cultivator named Overturn the Heavens. Unfortunately, Overturn the Heavens only pondered for a moment before saying faintly, I am just an ordinary Tao sect cultivator. I only want to learn divine abilities and be free in the world. I am not interested in the battle between the Confucian and Buddhist sects. Moreover, I have many good friends in both the Confucian and Buddhist sects. They all know what I am thinking. I don't think I will end up like you in the state of being unjust and lacking support. You are a man of great talent and vision. You should find other Tao sect cultivators who are as ambitious and idealistic as you. I only want to stay in a corner. You, the voice roared, causing the clouds to sway violently. Little Overturn the Heavens, don't think that I don't have any generals to send. Don't think that I don't care about your little bit of cultivation. Don't think that I don't know the little tricks you have in your heart. Overturn the heavens, didn't that mean overturning the heavens of the 3 continents? Do you think that no one would know that you're trying to hide something? Flipping Sky's voice was still indifferent. Flipping Sky is just a Taoist name. There will be 100 interpretations among 100 people. According to what Senior said, it should be a complete upheaval, right? It can't be overturn the heavens, overturn the heavens, overturn the heavens, but it means to freely overturn the heavens and earth. There's no point in saying anything more. This old man has already tolerated you for a long time. The reason why I'm not willing to kill you is that you're a talented cultivator with great potential in my Tao sect. Moreover, you're in the Pure Land world, and your identity isn't eye-catching. I want you to do something for me. Since you don't like toasting, then this old man can only let you taste the taste of a forfeit. After saying that, the black and white clouds suddenly emitted a bright light and pressed down several times faster than before. The splendor of the blue light pillar suddenly dimmed by a lot. Your Excellency, you're forcing my hand. Flipping Sky's voice was not afraid, and he also changed the senior to Your Excellency, as if Flipping Sky had other means to fight to the death. Ha ha ha. Little Flipping Sky, this old man has already said what needs to be said. If you're willing to die together with this old man, then it's your honor. But since this old man dared to come, why would I be afraid of your insignificant means? Flipping Sky snorted coldly. Ka ka ka. A strange sound came from the depths of the blue light, and then layers of pale light emerged from the blue. In an instant, the light pillar that was more than 10 acres in size actually condensed into a white ice pillar, and an indescribable coldness was emitted from this ice pillar. This coldness was so terrifying. Not only did the vegetation and rivers within the 4 mountains more or less turn into ice beads, even the surface of the mountain rocks had crystallized. As the light pillar condensed into an ice pillar, the devouring of the black and white clouds came to an abrupt stop. Layers of clouds rolled on top of the ice pillar and could not press down even half an inch. Not only that, with a loud whoop sound, the ice pillar that was more than 10 acres in size slowly shook, and the pale white splendor overflowed rapidly. A fist that was more than 10 acres in size gradually took shape and punched towards the huge cloud in the sky, as if it was going to shatter the sky with a punch. This is the ice bead, right? The voice in the cloud sneered. This thing is merely a pellet in this old man's eyes. You use your sea-measuring ruler. Only your natal magic weapon can resist this old man for a moment. Flipping Sky's expression was as usual, and he was not moved at all. He did not even say a word, and only focused on urging his mana. Following the sneer, the huge cloud layer suddenly shrank, and the black and white clouds condensed together once again. The clouds rolled, and the wind howled. However, other than the howling of the wind, the clouds did not emit any power, and even the brilliance commonly used in Dao Sect's remarkable powers did not appear. Compared to the punch below the clouds, which had the power to destroy the heavens and earth, the difference was too great. Below the clouds, the frozen fist shot up 1,000 feet, and every strand of ice that flickered with a pale white brilliance contained a huge amount of heaven and earth's spiritual energy. Below the ice pillar, a white bead the size of a bowl was spinning around. Below the white bead, there was a 3-foot baby that looked exactly like Flipping Sky. His face was flashing with a green brilliance, and his chubby hands were trembling slightly as he rubbed them together. The ruler that he was holding previously had disappeared. When the clouds had shrunk to a certain extent, they suddenly became transparent. Inside, an exceptionally bright white and black brilliance was born, just like 2 different colored suns. As soon as the brilliance was born, the clouds instantly stopped shrinking and then rolled at an extremely fast speed. A huge black and white hand, several acres in size, was formed from the clouds and grabbed towards the huge fist that was soaring into the sky. Puff! The huge hand grabbed onto the huge fist, and there was a loud noise. Countless waves of air rolled, and the spiritual energy that had gathered in the sky instantly turned into a gust of wind that whistled and blew away. Within hundreds of miles, sand and pebbles were blown away, and everything was chaotic. Not only that, although the huge fist was unusually cold and contained a terrifying amount of heaven and earth's spiritual energy, once it came into contact with the huge black and white hand, it immediately melted like an ice pillar under a raging fire. Almost as soon as the palm landed, the fist disappeared, and in the blink of an eye, more than 40% of the ferocious fist had disappeared. Yin Yang Illustration Handbook. Not only did you break free from the Yin Yang Illustration Handbook suppression, you actually refined it? An extremely surprised and small voice cried out in disbelief. Under the huge fist, Flipping Sky's Yuanying's face was pale, and a stream of light blue blood was seeping out from the Yuanying's mouth and nose. The ice bead that was previously the size of a bowl on top of the Yuanying's head had now turned into a thumb-sized ice dregs. It was even lighter than a goose feather as it floated in midair, as if the huge hand had not only destroyed the ice pillar, but also the ice bead under the ice pillar. Chapter 30, 411. Kikik. The voice was very proud, its laughter resounding through the heavens and earth. It shouted, "My Dao sect is a sect that seizes the good fortune of the heavens and earth. How can Confucian cultivators and Buddhist sects be compared to it? Although my Dao sect was destroyed by them, their divine abilities and methods will forever be unknown to them. Although this old man was suppressed by them due to a moment of carelessness, this old man also profited from the disaster and had the opportunity to use my Dao sect's supreme secret technique to entrust my primordial spirit to the Yin Yang Illustration Handbook. Now that this old man has an immortal and indestructible body, who in this world can be my opponent? Primordial spirit and trusting technique? Fantian's nascent soul had already slowly sunk into his body. Fantian slowly opened his eyes and asked himself in confusion. Obviously, he didn't understand what the primordial spirit and trusting technique was. The primordial spirit and trusting technique is a secret technique left behind by the immortal realm. How would a mere nascent soul cultivator, like you know? Have you seen this old man's methods? The voice shouted coldly, and the big hand suddenly opened up, instantly expanding by several times. It didn't care that he had already destroyed 40% of the icicles and covered the entire 4 mountains. He said, "Follow this old man. If you succeed under this old man will definitely help you become an immortal after my Dao sect prospers. This old man can also teach you this secret technique from the immortal realm." As he said that, a fiery red pill the size of a thumb flew out from the big hand and landed in front of Fantian's eyes. Fire. Fire god pill? This. This is for the nascent soul to leave the body. Fantion saw this pill, and his face flashed with shock. A strange look couldn't help but drift across his eyes. That's right, this is the fire god pill that this old man refined. It's really suitable for cultivators like you who practice water-based techniques to leave the body. You bumped into this old man. This is your chance. Of course, it can also be said that this old man's escape is your good fortune. This is a chance given to you by the heavenly Tao. Other than this old man, in these 3 continents, who else can easily refine the fire god pill? Who else can so easily bestow the fire god pill to you? You really want to bestow the fire god pill to me? Fantian's tone had already softened. What do you want this old man to do? Very simple. Very simple. It's as easy as lifting a finger for you. The voice was resolute and unquestionable. It's just that this old man can't say it now. You'll know when you follow this old man. As he spoke, the giant hand made a grabbing motion. The entire ground shook, and the 4 mountains seemed to be uprooted from the ground.
Sight.
Flipping Sky looked at the fire god pill in front of him, then looked at the violently shaking icicles and the 4 trembling mountains. With a sigh, he really couldn't resist this temptation. After sighing, he opened his mouth and spat out a breath of clear air onto the ice seed pearl. Buzz, buzz. The ice seed pearl, which was originally like ice dregs, began to rotate. Waves of brilliance splashed out and gradually turned into a sparkling and translucent white pearl. The splashed brilliance fell on the icicles, and the entire icicles collapsed with a loud bang. This collapse was very strange. It was from the outside to the inside. The outermost part of the icicles that connected to the 4 mountains was the first to melt. Woo! Without waiting for the icicles to completely disappear, the giant hand made a grabbing motion in midair. The icicles between the 4 mountains, along with Flipping Sky himself, were all caught by the giant hand. Amidst the howling winds, the dark clouds rolled and flew into the distance. In a moment, they disappeared, leaving behind only the 4 bare mountains and the mess between the mountains. Just as the dark clouds passed, there were immediately thousands of gusts of wind descending from the sky. The chi of heaven and earth within a few hundred miles surged back and forth. After a full half a day, the wind stopped. However, the countless chi of heaven and earth in this space had already triggered a celestial phenomenon. When the wind stopped, the dark clouds were densely gathered again. Without waiting for the moonlight to shine, there was a heavy downpour. Hail the size of a fist poured down, covering the area within 100 miles, especially between the 4 mountains. The sky was pitch black, but within the pitch black there was a kind of transparency. That transparency was the layers of water light. Flipping Sky's ice seed pearl condensed the water-based chi of heaven and earth within a few hundred or even 1,000 miles. The giant hand formed by the Yin-Yang Illustrated Handbook suddenly absorbed the chi of heaven and earth, causing a loss of the chi of heaven and earth. The Grand Duke of Heavenly Tao, the surrounding chi of heaven and earth gathered here. How could a normal celestial phenomenon withstand so much water-based chi of heaven and earth? Now, the chi of heaven and earth had all condensed into hail within the raindrops. It fell crazily, and a rare mountain torrential rain suddenly appeared. Fortunately, Flipping Sky was cultivating in the wilderness, and there were no traces of people. Within 10 days, the wind and rain were dense, and there were no casualties. Another 4 to 5 days passed, and the wind and rain stopped. It was a sunny day, and the sound of waterfalls could be seen from the 4 mountain peaks. It was already another paradise. Especially between the mountain peaks, there were large and small ponds and lakes everywhere. Even if Flipping Sky came back again, he probably wouldn't be able to recognize the earth-shaking changes here. Since even Flipping Sky couldn't recognize this new scenery, then Xian, Ci Hui Boy, and Xiao Hua, who was accompanying Ci Hui Boy from afar, wouldn't be able to recognize it. The 2 beasts stopped in midair, and Xian floated down from the strange bird. She stepped on the auspicious cloud and landed in the middle of the 4 mountain peaks. She released her yuan shun and looked at it again and again. She reached out her hand and took out a diamond-shaped crystal object. Although she held it in her hand, she hesitated and didn't release it. Xiai Hui Boy saw Xion's doubts and also jumped down from the azure lion. She flew in front of Xion and said with a smile, "Xion Tanyu, is there anything wrong? You didn't hesitate at all along the way, and there was no deviation at all. Why did you stop here? This is the communication magic tool of the Taoist fellow immortal, right? Why didn't you send it out?" Xion smiled bitterly and turned to look at the water under the scorching sun. She said, "Xiai Hui immortal friend, release your Buddhist awareness to check it out. Of course, if you have a Buddhist magic like Heavenly Eye, you can also use it. You can find some clues at that time."
Oh.
Xiai Hui raised her eyebrows and didn't release her Buddhist awareness. Instead, she said with a smile, "Since Tanyu has found something wrong, why don't you tell me? Why do I have to do something unnecessary?" Hearing Xiai Hui's words, Xion didn't know whether to laugh or cry. A trace of helplessness flashed on her face. She said, "You Buddhist disciples are good at everything except this. You don't have any curiosity. Didn't you see the great change in the chi of heaven and earth here? The ponds between the 4 mountain peaks are also newly formed? Don't tell me you don't want to see for yourself what caused such a huge change." "I don't want to." Xiai Hui still smiled and replied faintly, "There are 10,000 truths for everything in the world. The truth of every matter is different. Outside of this truth, there are also endless illusions. But if the world only sees illusions, who can discern the only truth? Even if I have heavenly eye or destiny connection, I can't see all the truths one by one. Amitabha, only my Buddha knows all the truths. If my Buddha lets me know, I don't need to pray, I will naturally know. But what if my Buddha doesn't let me know? Even if I wear out iron shoes, it's absolutely impossible for me to know the truth." See. Xion didn't have any reaction facing Xiai Hui. She seemed to be used to these words. But Xiaohua, who was lazily staying on the back of the azure lion, was suddenly stunned. That beautiful face flashed in his mind from time to time. That unforgettable voice sounded again. "TCH brother-in-law is really a miser. Actually, in my opinion, the most beautiful thing in this world is none other than a confusing secret. All the secrets are hidden behind countless false appearances. Finding the essence of the matter from these fragmented clues is the most beautiful thing." Seeing Xiao Hua stunned, Xiai Hui's face showed a trace of a gratified smile. Her words weren't said to Xion. Although Xion was a Confucian cultivator, her attainments in Buddhist principles were admirable even to Xiai Hui. Although this kind of Buddhist principles were profound, Xiai Hui didn't think that Xion wouldn't understand. Xiai Hui's words were deliberately to help Xiaohua. Along the way, Xiaohua left a very good impression on Xiai Hui. Xiaohua was originally a curious person. He liked to get to the bottom of ordinary matters. Now that he met Xiai Hui of the Buddhist sect, how could Xiaohua, who had always been puzzled about Buddhist principles, give up such a good opportunity? From the beginning with a smattering of knowledge to now with a rough understanding, Xiaohua's attainments in Buddhist principles were absolutely advancing by leaps and bounds. Xiai Hui certainly didn't know that Xiaohua had a Buddha Saraira in his Naiwan palace that was reciting the Buddhist scriptures of the exquisite temple day and night. Moreover, after Xiaohua discovered the spiritual energy, it seemed that his spiritual cavities had opened up. Whether it was the comprehension of Taoist techniques, Buddhist principles, or even the cultivation of Devil World's blood drop paradise, his progress was extremely fast. This made Xiai Hui feel that Xiaohua was an extremely intelligent Buddhist disciple. And the convergence of psychokinesis on the snowy mountain made Xiai Hui more and more aware that Xiaohua was the reincarnation of a senior monk with extremely heavy roots. Along the way, Xiai Hui also talked about Buddhist principles with Xiaohua without reserve. At this time, he encountered an excellent opportunity so he naturally wouldn't give up. He casually talked about things and enlightened Xiao Hua on the essence of Buddhist principles. Unfortunately, Xi Hui couldn't know what Xiao Hua was thinking. No matter what, he didn't know what Xiao Hua was thinking. Jiu Xia's words and Xi Hui's words are all referring to the essence and appearance of all things in the world. As the saying goes, different Daos cannot work together. The two people's thoughts and actions are so different. However, what is the real relationship between the two? Everyone has their own reasons. I don't know where Jiu Xia came from, but he emphasized on taking the initiative, seeking the first opportunity in all things. It's somewhat similar to my Taoist sex cultivation method, which only strives for the vitality between heaven and earth. And Xi Hui came from Buddhist sect, which emphasizes tolerance, obedience, and doesn't seek to stand out in all things. My thoughts are naturally in line with Jiu Xia's. However, Buddhist sect is the same as Taoist sex cultivation path. How can my knowledge be inferior to Taoist sex? Even if it's different, it's still another path. Now that I want to cultivate both Buddhist and Taoist techniques, where should I go from here? Chapter 30, 412. You'd better welcome your Buddhist senior. Xian saw a flash of understanding in Xi Hui's eyes and knew that he had gained something. She smiled and said, "Perhaps the senior can give you more guidance." A roar that sounded like a lion's roar came from afar, and a purple cloud drifted over. On the cloud stood a purple-haired hoe that was twice as tall as the azure lion. The purple-haired hoe's purple hair was several feet long, fluttering in the wind. On the ferocious beast's head, there was no fierceness in its fist-sized eyes. Instead, it had a very warm gaze that made people feel comfortable looking at it. Especially when it shook its head, there was a large collar with 2 silver bells around its neck. The clang 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 sound was even more pleasing to the ears. On the purple-haired hoe's back was a tall monk. The monk's face was simple and unadorned. His eyebrows were white, and the half-foot beard below his chin was also mixed with gray. The monk wore a gray monk's robe with a scabbard hanging from his waist. One of his hands was placed in front of his chest, and the other was holding a demon-subduing pestle that was as thick as a duck egg. The monk's eyes were like stars. He didn't look at Xi Hui, Xian, and Xiao Hua. Instead, he looked at the 4 extremes mountains with puzzlement like Xian did before. Amit Ba, Junior Xi Hui of Green Lotus Temple greet Senior. Xi Hui didn't dare to be negligent. Before the monk withdrew his gaze, he stepped forward and bowed with his palms together. Seeing Xi Hui step forward, Xiao Hua also braced himself and bowed. Junior Bodhi of Small Exquisite Temple greet Senior. However, Xian wasn't in a hurry to go over. With a smile on her face, she waited for the Buddhist disciples to greet each other. The monk nodded slightly and said, "I'm Gu Zhen of Red Lotus Temple. Are you here to find Dao Sec's Venerable Fantion?" Hearing the old monk say his Dharma name, Xi Hui didn't dare to be negligent and hurriedly replied, "Grandmaster, yes. We're here to find Venerable Fantion for some matters." "What's the matter?" Gu Zhen frowned and asked faintly, "You're a Buddhist disciple. Why are you so close to the remnants of Dao sect?" Xi Hui was a little embarrassed and said in a low voice, "I don't know Lord Fantion, but I came here with this female Tanyu. I am Xian, a Confucian cultivator." "Greetings, Grandmaster Gu Zhen." Xian didn't show any uneasiness on his face as he stepped forward and bowed. "And which sect is this little girl from? Or which up-and-coming aristocratic family?" Naturally, Gu Zhen knew a little about the hidden immortal continent. Hearing that the surname, Xian, was not a special family of Confucian cultivators, he nodded and asked. Xian smiled and said, "This one's birth is not worth mentioning, so it's best if I don't make a fool of myself. Fellow Daoist Xi Hui and this little monk were all invited by me. They don't know Venerable Overturning Heaven. However, may I know why Grandmaster Gu Zhen is here?" Gu Zhen glanced at Xian and said with a little dignity, "Venerable Overturning Heaven is a Dao sect disciple. Although he has always been very disciplined, he is still a cultivator of the 4th level of Essence Qi. Now that the remnants of Dao sect are said to be rising from the ashes, this old monk was ordered by the abbot to take a look and remind Venerable Overturning Heaven not to make a mistake and enter the abyss of eternal damnation. The 3 of us also arrived here half an hour ago. Hearing this, Xian knew that things were a little strange. She didn't dare to make excuses and hurriedly explained, "The 4 extreme mountains are completely different from before. Venerable Overturning Heaven is also missing. Oh, right, this one hasn't released my communication magic tool yet." Guzhen smiled and waved his hand. "Why don't you try releasing that magic tool?" Yes, Xian flipped her hand and threw the rhombus-shaped magic tool into the air. Puff! Xian spat out a mouthful of true qi on it, and the rhombus-shaped magic tool slowly melted into a pool of green water. The green water flickered with light and was about to condense into the shape of a sharp arrow. However, before the arrow could condense, puff, 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 puff. With a series of chaotic sounds, the green water turned into hundreds of bubbles.
Oh.
Xian raised her eyebrows in astonishment. Then, puff, 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 puff. The hundreds of bubbles burst one after another, and the green water disappeared into thin air. Venerable Overturning Heaven actually died? Xian's expression changed greatly. That's strange. Guzhen's brows furrowed. The changes in the 4 extreme mountains were obviously caused by Taoist cultivators. Venerable Overturning Heaven was a Taoist disciple with 4th grade essence force. How could they be so ruthless? Taoist disciples are always scheming against each other. Who knows what they're thinking? Perhaps Venerable Overturning Heaven wasn't very sociable and was ostracized by the Taoist disciples. Then, they killed him. Xian's expression slowly returned to normal as she said faintly. However, Guzhen didn't agree and shook his head slightly. New Tanyu's thinking is too simple. Although it was an internal conflict between Taoist disciples, for a 4th grade essence force cultivator to be killed so easily, his opponent must be a 4th grade essence force cultivator, or even higher. Since when did Western Paradise have such a powerful Taoist cultivator? Hee. Xian smiled faintly. This isn't the hidden immortal continent. There aren't any unfamiliar Taoist experts here. Even if this Taoist expert was a 9th grade essence force cultivator, what does it have to do with me? Guzhen's figure was huge, taller than ordinary people by more than half. His hands that were exposed outside of his monk robe were like palm leaf fans, and the demon-subduing pestle in his hand was several times larger than usual. His bell-like eyes swept across Xian, but she couldn't see his expression. However, Xian's body trembled slightly, and she hurriedly lowered her head as if she was frightened. After that, Guzhen paid no further attention to Xian and flew to the center of the 4 extreme mountains. The purple-furred Ho also shook its head and followed behind, completely ignoring the azure lion and the strange bird. Roar! Seeing the center of the 4 extreme mountains, the purple-fur Ho let out a loud roar that shook the surroundings. Guzhen waved his hand and placed the thick demon-subduing pestle on the purple-fur Ho's back.
Roar!
The roar was even louder than the purple-fur Ho's. Guzhen's roar was very powerful. Wherever the sound wave passed, Xian's true qi swirled around her body and strands of golden clouds emerged from her palace dress. The clouds slightly overflowed in the sound wave and protected Xian. Xian frowned slightly and asked in a low voice, "This is the Buddhist lion's roar. Grandmaster Guzhen, is this a warning?" Grandmaster Guzhen seems to be using some Buddhist divine ability. The power of this divine ability should be very strong. Ci Hui's face was still filled with respect as she answered in a low voice, "This lion's roar is a warning to the Taoist cultivators who might be hiding nearby to quickly show themselves if they don't have any evil intentions. Should we leave for a moment?" Xiaohua looked at Guzhen in the distance with interest and asked with a smile. As soon as Guzhen appeared, Xiaohua immediately greeted him. Unfortunately, Guzhen showed no interest in this little monk and didn't say a word to Xiaohua. Xi Hui nodded. Grandmaster Guzhen's warning is naturally a warning to us. Let's leave this place first. With that, Xi Hui stepped onto the indigo lion. The indigo lion didn't back down and let out a roar. Then, it waved its tail and flew out of the four extreme mountains with Xi Hui. Xian got on the strange bird, and Xiao Hua also stepped onto an auspicious cloud and slowly flew out. Woo! As soon as the three of them flew out of the mountain, the Buddhist light in the four extreme mountains shone brightly. Guzhen's body grew bigger and bigger. Then, a Dharma body comparable to the mighty Vajra emerged from Guzhen's body. Roar! At this moment, the purple-haired Ho let out a loud roar and flew a few hundred feet away from the Dharma body. Then, he opened his mouth and a fist-sized alms bowl flashed with faint Buddhist light and rushed into the air. Seeing the alms bowl slowly fly to the front of Guzhen's Dharma body, the Dharma body's giant hand also slowly waved. Chants sounded from the giant hand, and a Buddhist seal flashing with brilliant Buddhist light gradually took shape between the Dharma body's hands. Vajra Buddha seal? Xi Hui raised her eyebrows and exclaimed in a low voice. Grandmaster Guzhen is a Buddhist Dharma protector? Grandmaster Guzhen holds a demon-subduing pestle and has a tall and sturdy figure. If he's not a Buddhist Dharma protector, then what is he? Xian smiled. However, Grandmaster Guzhen's Vajra Buddha Dharma body is actually so powerful. This is beyond my expectations.
Amitabha.
As a Dharma protector, one's heart has sunk into oblivion. This life of cultivation can't be brought into the cycle of reincarnation. It can be considered a life of illusion. Buddhist Dharma protectors have always been respected. Grandmaster Guzhen is willing to sacrifice himself for others. This little monk truly admires you. Xi Hui couldn't help but sigh. Guzhen activated his willpower and struck the alms bowl with Vajra Buddha seals. The alms bowl grew larger, and the chants became louder and more hurried. It was as if thousands of Buddhas were chanting at the same time on the Four Extremities Mountain. Withdraw. When the alms bowl grew to over 100 feet in size, Guzhen's Dharma body raised his hand as if he was stretching. He grabbed the alms bowl and exerted force with his arms. The alms bowl slowly flipped over in the air with its mouth facing downward. Guzhen's hands left the alms bowl and formed another Buddhist seal. As the seal fell, the alms bowl flashed with Buddhist light, as if it was breathing. Then, a faint golden Buddhist light rushed out of the alms bowl and landed on a huge lake in the shape of a fan. The lake was rippling with blue waves, but when the blue water touched the Buddhist light, it immediately flew out of the lake. The alms bowl sucked the water in the lake in like a dragon drinking water. Xiaohua saw that there were other places covered by Buddhist light in the deep pool, and the water was being sucked away at a speed visible to the naked eye. He was puzzled and blurted out. Senior martial brother Xi Hui, this old monk. Oh, that's not right. What is Grandmaster Guzhen doing? Of course he's absorbing water. Xian smiled. I'm not old yet.
Can I see it?
Chapter 30, 413. Xiaohua rolled his eyes at Xian and said, Do you think I don't have eyes? Can't you see that he's absorbing water? The question is, why is he absorbing water? Xi Hui was also somewhat puzzled, but he hesitated for a moment and said tentatively, Perhaps the place where Grandmaster came from encountered a drought, so he's transporting the water here to other places to relieve the drought. At this point, Xi Hui seemed to have realized something and sped up her speech. Oh, that's right. Perhaps Grandmaster Xi Hui wants to take away all of the water in the Four Extremes Mountains to investigate the destruction of the Four Extremes Mountain. By investigating, he might be able to find traces of that Taoist expert. There's so much water in the Four Extremes Mountains. Could it be that Master Guzhen has Grandmaster Xi Hang's water bottle? Xian was somewhat disdainful. I don't think he can take it all with his alms bowl alone. Xian Sandanu, you're underestimating the Sumera Buddhist formation of our Buddhism sect. Xi Hui smiled. Grandmaster Guzhan's bowl may not be as good as Grandmaster C.I. Huey's water bottle, but the Four Extremes Mountains are only a few dozen miles wide. It's not a problem. Hehe. If that's the case, then that's the best. Hearing this, Xian beamed with joy. Her eyes flashed with a strange expression as she looked at the places where the alms bowl passed. The Buddhist light sucked away the deep ponds and ravines. After 4 hours, Guzhan finally absorbed all the water in the Four Extremes Mountains into the alms bowl. The alms bowl didn't change much, but Guzhan's Vajra Buddha Dharma body had shrunk by more than half, and even his Buddhist light had dimmed a lot. Guzhan looked around with satisfaction and pointed at the alms bowl. The alms bowl fell back into the purple-haired Ho's mouth, but he didn't withdraw his Dharma body. He stepped on a Buddhist cloud and headed toward one of the Four Extremes Mountains. It seems that's all there is to it. Xiaohua saw that Guzhan was very serious. He first released his Buddha's consciousness, then used his naked eyes to examine carefully. He even dropped clouds in some places. He grabbed some gravel and other things from the ground or stone walls to examine carefully. He couldn't help but nod inwardly. Xian Tanyue. Seeing that Guzhan was ignoring them, Xiaohua said, "There's no longer anyone here, so you can't borrow the magic weapon you want. This little monk does not have much time. If it is possible, shall we leave now? Senior brother C.I. Huey's teachings have not been in vain, since this little monk is able to lend you a helping hand." Don't worry. Xian smiled. That place is very dangerous. The three of us only have a 40% chance of success. And Venerable Master Fontaine's magic weapon was the nemesis of one of those dangerous situations. Now that we haven't found Venerable Master Heaven Flipping, Heaven has sent us Master Guzhan. With Master Guzhan, our chances of success have increased by 20%. Speaking of this, Xian looked at C.I. Hui embarrassedly and said, "Immortal friend C.I. Hui, before I only thought about the Tao sect's heaven-flipping man and the Buddhist sect-related things should be given to you. Now that we have Master Guzhan, haha, it's fine." C.I. Hui smiled and waved her hand. Didn't I say it just now? To be able to gain enlightenment of the Buddhist Dharma through experience is much more precious than any Buddhist weapon left behind. Besides, if this little monk coveted some Buddhist weapon, why would I invite junior brother Deepu? If Grandmaster Guzhan is of some help to you, you can invite him. This little monk does not mind. AI, many thanks, immortal friend C.I. Hui. Xian sighed. This way, I feel that I have wronged you. How about this? Apart from the immortal weapons and the Buddhist weapon promised to Master Guzhan, as long as you like something, you can have the priority to choose. C.I. Hui shook her head. It's useless to say so much now. You should think about how to persuade Grandmaster Guzhan. He might not be interested in this matter. Hee, rest assured, immortal friend. Xian smiled and said, I have a 40% chance of persuading ordinary Buddhist experts. Since Master Guzhan is a Buddhist sex guardian, I have a 60% chance of inviting him to help. That's true. C.I. Hui nodded. Buddhist sex guardians are highly skilled. The ancient treasure that Grandmaster Tanyue mentioned is very attractive to Buddhist sex guardians. Since this little monk can go, Grandmaster Guzhan can naturally go as well. Now, we only have to see if Grandmaster Guzhan needs to return to the temple to report. If time is too tight, I'm afraid it won't be possible. Xian expressed her concern. Immortal friend Xian, Xiaohua at the side spoke. Since Grandmaster Guzhan is here, does this little monk not need to go? This little monk really has something to do. Little monk, whether you go or not has nothing to do with me. Xian pursed her lips and smiled. You can ask your senior brother C.I. Hui. Senior brother? Xiaohua opened his mouth, but when he saw C.I. Hui's smiling face, he immediately shut his mouth. He already knew the answer. He just muttered, forget it, just pretend this little monk didn't say anything. Xiaohua understood in his heart that C.I. Hui pulled him to that place for his own good. Previously, CI Hui wanted to explain Buddhist principles and Buddhist scriptures to Xiaohua so that his Buddhist cultivation and Buddhist sect's magical power could match, so that he wouldn't walk the path of only practicing magical power and not understanding Buddhist doctrine. Later, when he saw that Xiaohua's Buddhist sect's magical power was not inferior to his, he even wanted to help Xiaohua. He wanted Xiaohua to gain something from this trip, so he even vaguely gave Xiaohua half of the Buddhist weapons in the dangerous place. Now, it was even better. With Gu Zhen, the guardian of the Lotus Realm, although Xiaohua might gain less benefits, it was also a lot safer. CI Hui naturally wouldn't let him go. Jiang Luer's matter can be considered to have reached the point where it can be solved. Haste makes waste. I'd better take one step at a time. Perhaps with CI Hui's recommendation, I don't need to worry about it. That Jinshan Temple's great Zen master Ji Kong will agree to awaken Jiang Luer from the Nirvana realm, right? Gu Zhen's inspection was very detailed. Half a day passed very quickly. Seeing the full moon rising, there was no other movement in the entire Four Poles Mountain except for the sound of wind. The usual birds chirping and cicadas at the foot of the mountain were also gone. Xiaohua didn't care about it at first, but after a while, he understood that this situation was probably caused when Lord Fantion fell. The cultivator, who was also a disciple of Taoism, was ruthless. Not only did he kill Lord Fantion, but all the creatures near the Four Poles Mountain were also affected. Alas! Xiaohua sighed for no reason, just like a real disciple of Tantric Buddhism. "Why haven't you all left yet?" A slightly tired voice sounded. Monk Gu Zhen had already retracted his dharmakaya. He sat cross-legged on the back of the purple-haired Ho and slowly flew over. Under the moonlight, his bright eyes were obviously more gentle than before. CI Hui took a few steps forward and said respectfully, "Our cultivation is shallow, so we can't help Grandmaster with anything. But without Grandmaster's order, we dare not leave without permission." "Cultivation base is shallow? Haha, little monk, you're belittling yourself." The purple-haired Ho had already flown to the front of the crowd. Gu Zhen jumped down from his mount and looked at CI Hui from head to toe. He said lightly, "The realm of the bright eyes is a watershed. It's not a place that ordinary Buddha can enter. Little monk, you can have your current cultivation because of the root of wisdom planted early. This old monk can't compare with you." "I don't dare. Compared to Grandmaster, I'm still far behind." CI Hui hurriedly lowered her head and put her palms together. "Everyone has their own fate," Gu Zhen said lightly. "This old monk envies you all for cultivating Buddhism in peace. You can enter the cycle of reincarnation and don't have to be stained with karma." Yes, Grandmaster and other Buddhist protectors subdued devils and demons for our Buddhism. They protect the peace of our Buddhism and the safety of our Buddha. This is what we should respect. CI Hui said carefully. "Master, did you find anything?" Seeing that the scene was a bit cold, Xian hurriedly asked and led to the main topic. However, Gu Zhen didn't answer Xian. Instead, he looked at Xiaohua and asked, "Your Buddhist name is Tipu, and you claim to be a disciple of Shaolin Long Temple. How come this old monk has never heard of this temple? You just entered our Buddhism, and you're actually also in the realm of the bright eyes. Could it be that you're also walking the path of a protector?" Xiaohua put his palms together and said with a smile, "The Shaolin Long Temple that disciple mentioned is a small temple in the mountains. It's normal that Grandmaster hasn't seen it. As for whether disciple is walking the path of a protector, disciple doesn't know. But these few days I've been talking about Buddhism with senior brother CI Hui. I haven't heard him talk about it. It shouldn't be." "Grandmaster," CI Hui hurriedly explained, "junior brother Tipu has deep roots in wisdom. He hasn't entered our Buddhism, but he's already cultivated to the realm of the bright eyes. He's also quite accomplished in the cultivation of Buddhism. It's just that he hasn't been fated to enter our Buddhism. Just a few days ago, when he was shaving in the Shaolin Long Temple of the Great Snow Mountain, disciple saw the corpse of the Shaolin Long Temple with his own eyes." And Gu Zhen nodded and didn't comment. He looked at Xian and said, "Benefactress is a Confucian cultivator. Why are you so concerned about Fontien's death? If you don't have any secrets, can you tell this old monk? This one doesn't care about the life and death of a Taoist disciple. Xian said with a smile. This one is just a little curious. If Grandmaster doesn't want to say it, then don't say it. Actually, it's nothing. Xian didn't want to listen anymore. Guzhen said, this old monk doesn't dare to judge whether Fantion has fallen or not. However, from the traces of the battle in the Four Extremes Mountain, it should be a Taoist cultivator whose cultivation is far superior to Fontien's. The battle between the two involved the entire Four Extremes Mountain and even affected the weather for hundreds of miles around the Four Extremes Mountain. Cultivation far superior to Fantion? Who is this person? Where did he come from? Xian was flabbergasted. Fantion is already at the 3rd stage of the 4th grade of elemental energy, right? If his cultivation is far superior to Fontien's, doesn't that mean he's at the 5th stage of elemental energy? There are very few Taoist cultivators of this level in the 3 continents. This is not something this old monk knows. Guzhen shook his head slightly. His words surprised Xiao Hua. This old monk only came to warn Fantion. Since he's no longer here, this old monk will investigate this place clearly. I only need to return to the temple and report. That person's strength should be much stronger than this old monk. How can this old monk offend him? Chapter 30, 414. The more Xiao Hua thought about it, the more the drawbacks of several cultivation methods began to show. Now, it was merely a conflict of ideas. Perhaps, in the end, the conflict between Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, demon, devil, and soul would become even more severe. Perhaps Xiao Hua's primordial spirits, which came from the same source, would even fight against each other. Seeing the confusion in Xiao Hua's eyes, Xi Hui was delighted and said with a smile, now, when Tanyu came here, he first showed confusion, then thought about Tanyu's calmness along the way. This little monk knows that this must be the place Tanyu is looking for. But as for why Tanyu hesitated to send out the communication magic tool, even if this little monk didn't ask, Buddha would have told this little monk through Tanyu, right? Rather than spend this little monk's energy searching, it's better to listen to Tanyu's explanation here. Go with the flow. That's right, it's exactly like that. Xi Hui's words made Xiao Hua's eyes light up. He couldn't help but ponder. Some things, when you don't have the power to pursue them, you can only go with the flow. Only by following the development of things can you find the root of the matter. And regardless of whether it's Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, demon, devil, or soul cultivation methods, they are all a kind of appearance. Only by finding the root of cultivation can I have the power to solve my own problem, right? Since he thought of this, Xiao Hua's mind became active again. He looked around and said with a smile, Senior Martial Brother Xi Hui, you're right. This place must be the place where fellow Taoist Xian is looking for an old acquaintance. If I'm not wrong, it should be because of the great change in the scenery. Except for the 4 mountain ridges, fellow Taoist Xian doesn't dare to recognize the other places. This is why fellow Taoist Xian is hesitating now. Seeing the 2 little monks singing the same tune, Xian laughed inwardly. In fact, this kind of situation could be imagined with just a little thought. These 2 people actually said such profound words. It was said that all Buddhist disciples were eloquent. Just look at these 2 little monks in front of her, and you'll know. However, Xian only smiled and said, fellow Taoists are right. The Taoist cultivator living in seclusion here is called heaven flipping. Although he's only a Taoist nascent soul cultivator, with the help of his life-bound magic tool, he can reach the 5th level of origin energy realm. That's why others call him heaven flipping venerable. In addition to being a Taoist, this cultivator is also proficient in our Confucian cultivation method. I met this person by chance 100 years ago, and then we met several more times. I knew that this person was wholeheartedly focused on Tao, and only wanted to cultivate. He did not want to show off and was not interested in the battle between the Taoist sect and the Buddhist sect. Not only did he not contact other Taoist cultivators, he had not even taken in a disciple. Therefore, I exchanged contact methods with him. He could be considered an old friend. This place is called the Four Extremes Mountains. I've been here several times before. In addition to having an extremely powerful natal magic treasure, Master Heaven Flipping Master is also proficient in Taoist magic circles. The Four Extremes Mountain itself is a large magic circle that Master Heaven Flipping Master has been operating for hundreds of years. When I visited Master Heaven Flipping Master before, I saw him demonstrate it. It's really magnificent inside, and it's not comparable to ordinary Taoist cultivators. As Enchanting spoke, she pointed at the four mountains. Now, apart from the four extreme mountains, which are the four formation cores, all traces of the formation are gone. Even the scenery of the four extreme mountains has completely changed. If this isn't an extremely brilliant Taoist formation, then a huge change has occurred in the four extreme mountains. Master Heaven Flipping Master is already no longer in the four extreme mountains. This place is definitely not a Taoist illusory formation. After Enchanting finished speaking, Cai Hui spoke up. This little monk has already used Buddhist perception to examine this place. These mountains and rivers are all real, and there isn't a trace of illusion at all. Junior brother Tipu, what do you think? Xiaohua seemed to be very familiar with the title of Junior Brother Tipu. He also smiled and said, "That's right. This little monk has also used Buddhist perception to examine this place. My Buddhist perception is the most observant. If there is any Buddhist formation, defensive formation, or magic circle, even if it can't be broken, it can still find a trace of a flaw. Moreover, this place is full of vitality, and there isn't a trace of pretense." Then a huge change has occurred in the four extreme mountains. It's hard to predict Master Heaven Flipping Master's life and death. A trace of gloominess flashed through Enchanting's eyes. She didn't know if it was because of Master Heaven Flipping Master's fate or because she had come at a bad time. Haha, Cai Hui continued. The great change in the four extreme mountains is a man-made disaster, not a natural disaster. Although this little monk can't cultivate all 6 divine abilities, this little monk knows that the one who dealt with Master Heaven Flipping Master was a Taoist disciple. Master Heaven Flipping Master is most likely dead. Oh, why is fellow Taoist Cai Hui so sure? Enchanting stared at Cai Hui and asked curiously. My Buddhist faction's disciples don't know how to use Heaven-Earth Origin Chi, and your Confucian faction's disciples don't know how to use Heaven-Earth Origin Chi. Only Taoist faction's disciples and a few demons know how to control Heaven-Earth Origin Chi. Cai Hui pointed at the rippling water below her feet and explained, "There are so many water ripples here, far surpassing other places in the surrounding 1,000 miles. It must be the result of the Heaven-Earth Origin Chi wreaking havoc. Since Master Heaven Flipping Master's cultivation is only at the 4th or 5th level of Origin Chi, he definitely wouldn't be able to cause such a huge change by himself. Only 2 cultivators who can control Heaven-Earth Origin Chi together can cause this. Moreover, the strength of the cultivator who came to deal with Master Heaven Flipping Master is even higher than him. Whether it is Taoist faction's disciples or demons, they wouldn't be as merciful as my Buddhist faction's disciples, or as magnanimous as your Confucian faction's disciples. Since their method could cause such a huge disturbance and even destroy Master Heaven Flipping Master's formation, then Master Heaven Flipping Master's life and death. It's easy to guess. AI, the person who understands me is definitely not an old friend. This person is definitely my enemy." Hearing Cai Hui's explanation, Xiaohua couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The divine abilities of my Taoist faction's cultivators mostly rely on Heaven-Earth Origin Chi. The greater the divine ability, the greater the impact it has on Heaven-Earth. When the 2 cultivators fought, the 2 of us didn't suffer any injuries, but the surrounding environment was the first to be destroyed. I didn't even notice the scene, but this Buddhist Cai Hui actually saw it so clearly and explained it so incisive. Even if I don't release my divine sense, I can still determine that what Cai Hui said is true. Xiaohua felt a little awkward in his heart, but he said, "Io, that's not good. If Master Heaven Flipping Master falls, then wouldn't the magic tool that fellow Taoist Xian wants to borrow be lost? Then can we still go there? AI, of course we have to go. Xian said bitterly. Without Master Heaven flipping Master's magic tool, our chances of success will be reduced by 20%. However, there isn't much time left, so I have no choice but to. While Xian was speaking, a faint Buddhist sense swept over from the horizon and fell on the three people in the Four Extremes mountain.
Oh.
Another Buddhist Taoist has come? Xian raised her eyebrows and looked towards the source of the Buddhist sense. Xia Hui still had that kind of smiling expression. She glanced at Xiao Hua and said, just from the Buddhist sense alone, this person should have reached the Lotus Realm, which is a level higher than this little monk and junior martial brother Tipu's bright Lotus Realm. He should be our senior. Hearing Xia Hui expose his Buddhist cultivation realm, Xiao Hua couldn't help but feel the corners of his eyes twitch, even though this realm was already somewhat concealed by the secret technique of soul cultivation. In his heart, he finally understood why Xia Hui only thought for a moment before agreeing when he addressed Xia Hui as senior brother when he had just shaved his head and become a monk. It turned out that Xia Hui had already discovered the secret he was trying to hide from his Buddhist awareness. Xiao Hua smiled embarrassedly and bowed. Ba, senior martial brother Xia Hui really has a great divine ability to see through this little monk's strength at a glance. AI, this little monk was still too superficial. Looking at Xia Hui again, she said with a depressed expression, this little monk's cultivation hasn't reached the bright Lotus realm yet. Previously, I clearly didn't mind junior martial brother Tipu's concealment and didn't intend to expose this matter, but when it came to this matter, I couldn't help it. Fellow Taoist Xia Hui, you're the one who's superficial. Xian said with a smile. That little monk Tipu didn't call you senior when he saw you, nor was he particularly respectful when he spoke. It's very obvious that his Buddhist cultivation realm isn't much lower than yours or mine. Your Buddhist doctrine and Buddhist doctrine don't need to be too compatible. He doesn't understand Buddhist doctrine, so naturally, he wants to ask you for advice. Since you know that his Buddhist doctrine isn't inferior to yours, whether it's the previous tacit agreement or the current clear indication, you don't think it's too much. But your remorse has left a mark on your bright Lotus realm. Ba, good indeed, good indeed. Xia Hui put her palms together and said with a smile, Enchanting is right. This little monk's body was speaking the truth, but I didn't know the meaning. Every time I was enlightened by you, I learned a lot. In that case, this little one doesn't need to give you any promise or reward for this trip. Xian glanced at the man and beast in the distance who were already flying closer and said to Xia Hui with a smile. Xia Hui raised her head. Enchanting is right. This little monk has already learned a lot from Tanyue. Even if there's no promise or reward, this little monk is still willing to go. It had to be said that Xia Hui's current situation was very similar to Xia Mei's. Both of them were proficient in Buddhist doctrine and their Buddhist supernatural powers were also extremely high. Both of them were at a bottleneck that was difficult to break through at the same time. Furthermore, they had been stuck at this bottleneck for a very long time. It was so long that they felt irritated in their hearts. At this moment, they wanted to jump out, but they lacked an effective method to break through this bottleneck. There were also thousands of distracting thoughts in their hearts that disturbed their cultivation. The contradiction in their hearts could even be described as paranoid. He could not do this, nor could he do that. Other than reciting Buddhist scriptures, there seemed to be no other safe actions. Of course, reciting Buddhist scriptures was a slow and steady path, but Xia Hui didn't want to rely on this kind of ordinary method. Like Xia Mei, he needed to find an opportunity to break through the bottleneck from the outside world. Xia Hui didn't know much about Xian's background, but from their previous contacts, Xian's behavior was more mysterious, and his speech and behavior were also elegant. In particular, the gap between Buddhism and Confucianism didn't exist in Xian's eyes. Therefore, Xia Hui felt that Xian was an old friend who could have a deeper relationship with him. This time, Xian sent a message to Xi Hui. Xi Hui didn't hesitate and immediately came over. On the way up the mountain, not to mention Xian's many reminders, even the discussion with the little monk Tipu also benefited him a lot. This really made him feel that this trip was not in vain. Chapter 30, 4:15. Xian hurriedly asked, Master Guzhen, are you going to return to Jianglu Temple? Haha, I don't think I need to tell you where I'm going, do I? What Xian said to Guzhen earlier, Guzhen returned the same words. However, Xian was not surprised. With a smile on her lips, she replied, If I have a chance to let Master Guzhen get rid of the drawback of not being able to bring karma into samsara, I wonder if Master Guzhen is willing to take it. What do you mean, benefactress? Guzhen wasn't as ecstatic as Xian thought. Instead, he frowned, and the monk robe on his tall figure trembled slightly. This trembling wasn't due to excitement, but a kind of alertness. Even Xi Hui was puzzled by Xian's words. He said, Enchanting, being a Buddhist guardian is a kind of sacrifice. Grandmaster Guzhen and the others often have no choice but to kill demons and protect Buddha. Tanue, you don't need to use this to provoke Grandmaster Guzhen's Buddhist heart. Before Xi Hui finished speaking, Xian pursed her lips and smiled. Fellow immortal Xi Hui, do you think I'm joking with Master Guzhen? Do you think I don't know some secrets of Buddhism? Little girl, Guzhen said coldly, just say what you want to say. Why beat around the bush? I've long offered my body to Buddhism and the Buddha fruit to the Buddha Lord. I'm no longer interested in the secret arts of breaking away from being a guardian and condensing karma. I don't know how many secret arts your Buddhism sect has, Xian said faintly, but I know a place where there might be ancient Buddha rainbow. Ancient Buddha rainbow? How is that possible? When Xian finished speaking, Guzhen was dumbfounded. He cried out in disbelief, how can there be an ancient Buddha in the Pure Land world? With that, Guzhen's tall figure trembled involuntarily. His previous alertness had long disappeared and was replaced by excitement from the bottom of his heart. What's ancient Buddha rainbow? Seeing Guzhen so nervous and excited, Xi Hui naturally knew that this thing was really useful to Guzhen. However, he had never heard of ancient Buddha color. The ancient Buddha luster is a 7-colored relic condensed by the reincarnation of the ancient Buddha Lord. This relic contains the supreme willpower of the Buddha Lord. However, because the negative karma in it was not pure, it was abandoned when the Buddha Lord reincarnated. Xian glanced at the speechless Guzhen and explained, the Buddha Lord's karma is so powerful. Who can resist the Buddha Lord's karma? Therefore, no one dared to use this 7-colored relic. However, after the 7-colored Sarira was placed between heaven and earth for 100,000 or even millions of years, the karma in it would be tempered by the mind power of the Pure Land. In the end, only the mind power of the Buddha Lord in the Sarira would be left. Although it was only a wisp or half a wisp, it was powerful enough to allow a bodhisattva to attain fruition. If Master Guzhen condensed this thing, the half-wisp of mind power would be enough for him to condense a protective relic and protect the relic's negative karma during his reincarnation, ensuring that he would not lose his mind. Such a thing. Why didn't Tanue mention it before? Xi Hui was shocked and asked without hesitation. Xian smiled and shook her head. It's not that I didn't want to explain it to you, fellow immortal. It's just that you and I are not strong enough to come into contact with this thing. If I said it, it would only make you greedy, and it would even be detrimental to your cultivation. Today, I met Master Guzhen, and I have a request for you. With your strength, you should be able to give it a try. Naturally, I had to explain it to you. I see. Xi Hui nodded slightly, obviously trusting Xian. I understand now. Then Xi Hui turned to Guzhen. Under the moonlight, Guzhen's tall figure had stabilized. She said, Grandmaster, does what Tanue said make sense? That's right. Guzhen's eyes flickered under the moonlight. He said, Although the path of being a Buddhist Dharma protector isn't smooth, Buddha is merciful and leaves many chances for survival. This ancient Buddha relic is the safest, but it's also the most difficult. Not to mention that the sons of Buddhas who can ascend wouldn't have too many relics left behind. Even if they did, there wouldn't be many. The Pure Land is so vast, and there are so many sons of Buddhas. Anyone who can obtain it is a great opportunity. This old monk never thought there would be an ancient Buddha relic left in this world. At this point, Guzhen stared at Exion and asked coldly, "May I know how I can be of service to you, benefactress?" And how could benefactress possibly know the whereabouts of such a supreme treasure of the Buddhist sect?
Haha.
Exion looked up at Guzhen's monk robe. His hands hidden under the robe seemed to have formed a Buddhist seal. She smiled faintly and reached out to take a hairpin from her hair. She flung her hand, and the hairpin streaked across the air with a golden light before landing in front of Guzhen. "Grandmaster, you'll know when you see it. But don't reveal my origin." "Oh." Guzhen frowned. He stretched out his hand, which was as thick as a dragon's claw, and grabbed the hairpin. When he glanced at the hairpin, he was surprised. He looked at the hairpin several times, and then at Exion. Finally, he waved his hand and returned the hairpin to Exion. He said, "I understand. Since you have such a background, it's no big deal for you to know this secret." Exion took the hairpin and looked at Ci Hui with a smile. Ci Hui immediately waved her hand and said, "Exion, there's no need for this little monk to see it. This little monk befriended a mortal friend not because of a mortal friend's origin. If this little monk knew about it, there would be a dispute in my words. This little monk doesn't want to speak without thinking." "Haha, that's right." Exion stretched out her hand and inserted the golden hairpin into her hair, not giving Xiaohua the opportunity to examine it. "Damn it, is there a need for this?" Xiaohua secretly curled his lips. This Xiao has seen Morong Tsomyan from a first-class family and Princess Baihua from Cha New Country. Even if you're the daughter of a first-class family, what can you do? This Xiao doesn't even have the mood to tease you. Ba, I've sinned. This little monk is Di Pu, not Xiaohua from the Dao sect.
How can you talk about teasing me?
What does New Tanyue want this old monk to do? Guzhen's tone was somewhat cautious. The female benefactor also changed to New Tanyue. "It's like this." Exion said concisely. "This one invites immortal friend Ci Hui to go to an ancient ruin. That's where the immortals and Buddhas joined hands to kill the Dao sect. As far as this one knows, there's an immortal artifact left behind in the Pure Land world." Immortal artifact? Guzhen was dumbfounded again. He immediately looked up at the full moon in the sky. He almost suspected that he was dreaming. First, there was the ancient Buddha celestial artifact, and now there was an immortal artifact. This was something he had never dreamt of. "Yes, it's an immortal artifact," Exion said with a smile. "If it's not an immortal artifact, how could there be the ancient Buddha celestial artifact?" But Guzhen originally wanted to ask how Exion knew, but thinking of the golden hairpin he saw just now, he felt somewhat relieved. If it's not that kind of origin, how could there be such a secret? This secret was left behind by the Dao sect that we joined hands to kill. Therefore, there are a lot of formations inside. Ordinary Buddhas and Confucian cultivators can't find it, let alone go in. After so many years, the location of this secret has long been forgotten. If this one hadn't looked up an old matter recently, no matter what, I wouldn't have thought that there was such an immortal artifact in the Pure Land world. Exion said again. "Since it's an immortal artifact, how can we do it? Female Tanyue should ask for help from her own sect." Guzhen smiled bitterly. Although he coveted the ancient Buddha celestial artifact, he still knew that this place was not a place where he could escape unscathed. Exion waved her hand disapprovingly. "Master, you're wrong. If this one asks for help from others, how could the immortal artifact fall into their hands? Master, don't forget that it's an immortal artifact. Which Confucian cultivator doesn't want it? Until now, This one only dares to tell fellow immortal Ci Hui and Master about this. This one doesn't dare to trust anyone else. Guzhen opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he was stopped by Xion's words. Moreover, this one has made sufficient preparations for this matter. Not only did I read the records of that place clearly, but I also memorized all the formations inside. I also have a well-thought-out plan to break all the formations. As a matter of fact, this one came to the Four Extremes Mountain to borrow a Dao sect magic treasure from Master, Heaven-Flipping Master to break one of the formations. Of course, since Master Heaven-Flipping Master has fallen, you should be able to use his Buddhist alms bowl as well. Oh, so that's how it is. Guzhen finally understood. Female Tanyue wants to break the Dao sect's water-based formation. Exactly. Xion clapped her hands and smiled. You're right, Master. If you're not in a hurry to return to the Crimson Melon Temple, you can come with us. I estimate that the round trip will take around 20 days. Oh, Guzhen was surprised again. Only 20 days? How could there be such a forbidden area near the Four Extremes Mountain? This one has already spoken so frankly. Master, there's no need to force this one any further, right? Xion said with a smile. Guzhen's face flushed red, and he smiled embarrassedly. He put his palms together and said, Ba, female Tanyue has indeed given this old monk a difficult problem. Since it's an opportunity, it won't be easy. Xion smiled. If it's so easy to obtain, how could it be called an opportunity? In any case, this one has already explained the reason for this matter. It's up to Master to decide whether to go or not. Ci Hui? Guzhen thought for a moment, then suddenly asked the little monk, Ci Hui. Ci Hui was clearly taken aback, but he hastily nodded and said, This little monk is here. Do you have any instructions for me, martial ancestor? Do you know where that secret is?
Guzhen asked.
Chapter 30, 416. Ci Hui glanced at Xion and said with a smile, Xion Tanyue didn't tell me the details, but I know the general location. It'll definitely take less than 20 days. Since that's the case, I'll go with Xion Tanyue. Hearing that, Guzhen made a decision. I just need to return to Jiangli Temple within a month. Good, Xion clapped and said, with an expert like Master Guzhen, I'll have more confidence. Guzhen waved his hand. I have some useless Buddhist abilities, so I don't dare to hope for any immortal tools. I only hope to obtain the ancient Budokai Li under new Tanyue's guidance. Oh, in addition to that, I don't need anything in the forbidden area. I won't ask about the specific distribution. Ba, thank you for your help, Grandmaster. Ci Hui knew these words were meant for him, so he didn't dare to neglect and hurriedly thanked him. Since you've decided, we'd better hurry over. Xion urged. We'll try our best to leave more time for you. Benefactor, Xion. Xiaohua said with a wry smile. Now that things have come to this, you should tell me where you're going, right? Of course. Xion said with a smile. I'm not afraid to tell you that it's Saint River. Even if you know it's Saint River, without my guidance, you won't be able to find the forbidden area. Saint River? Xiaohua was stunned, and so was Guzhen. The two of them said almost at the same time. The Saint River of the 3 rivers and 4 seas? Xiaohua blinked his eyes. He had said the sentence, but there was one sentence he did not shout out. Saint Jiang is actually in the Elysium world? Guzhen followed Xiaohua and said, Is it the Saint River that Saint River hides the Emperor's sword, and the Emperor's sword comes out to suppress the 9 provinces? This is beyond old monk's expectations. That's right, it's that Saint River. Xion said proudly. In the 3 continents, besides the Saint River of the Pure Land world, who else dares to call themselves Saint River? Alas, I go to Saint River almost every year. Why didn't I know there was such a forbidden area at the bottom of the river? Guzhen sighed. Ci Hui, on the other hand, was very calm. She smiled and shook her head. Grandmaster, the Saint River crosses the Pure Land world. It is known as the origin of the 2 seas. How did you find the forbidden area in such a huge Saint River? Is the immortal artifact the Son of Heaven's sword? Xiao Hua suddenly called out. Xian looked at Xiao Hua, rolled her eyes, and said sarcastically, "Little monk Tipu, the sage Jiangsong's Son of Heaven's sword is just a legend. Do you think the Dao sect's immortal weapon can suppress the 9 regions? If that's the case, where would the face of us Confucian cultivators go? Even without the Son of Heaven's sword, since Saint Jiang is in the Pure Land world of the Buddhism sect, could it be that the origin of the Confucian cultivators is the Pure Land world, not the hidden immortal continent?" Xiao Hua seized the opportunity and unceremoniously retorted.
Oh.
Xian didn't open her mouth, but Xi Hui, who was next to her, was surprised. She said in surprise, "If it weren't for junior brother Tipu, this little monk would never have thought about this. This Saint Jiang is clearly the name of Confucian cultivators, so why is it still called this in the Pure Land world? Even the name hasn't been changed. It's really puzzling." Speaking to this point, Xi Hui somewhat apologetically said to Xian Tanua, "Don't blame this little monk for being curious. This little monk has always been engrossed in Buddhist cultivation, so I don't know much about these secular things. Suddenly hearing this today, I feel a bit strange. It's not that I'm being disrespectful to you Confucian cultivators." Xian smiled and said, "Fellow immortal Xi Hui's attitude is normal. Haggling over every ounce is not good for your cultivation. As for why Saint Jiang is in the Pure Land world, and why the name of Saint Jiang is contrary to the name of the Buddhism sect, this involves a great ancient secret. This little one only vaguely heard about it. As for the specific truth, I'm afraid it has long been annihilated in time and space. If even female benefactor doesn't know, then I'm afraid not many people in this world know." Guzhen obviously had the same idea as Xi Hui. He also didn't care about Saint Jiang or Buddha Jiang. He casually said, and then looked up at the full moon and urged, "Since female benefactor doesn't know what that immortal tool is, it's not too late for me to wait until we reach Saint Jiang. Yes, let's hurry on our way. On the way, this little one will tell the 2 fellow immortals what I know, so that we can carefully plan and avoid any mistakes." Xian naturally echoed. She waved her hand, and the somewhat lazy strange bird in the distance immediately shook its black and white feathers and flew over. Strange, since the Son of Heaven's sword is so powerful and is said to be able to shake the 9 regions, why is it not ranked in the top 10 imperial tools? Xiao Hua's curiosity was greatly aroused. He followed behind Xian and asked, "Since there is a saying that Saint Jiang hid the Son of Heaven's sword, then is the Son of Heaven's sword in Saint Jiang now? If it's not there, then where is the Son of Heaven's sword?" "Oh, the Son of Heaven's sword. The Son of Heaven is the Son of Heaven. In this world, who can wield the Son of Heaven's sword?" Xiao Hua's question was even more powerful than the Buddhist sect's secret incantation. Hearing it, Xian covered her face and ran away. She jumped on the strange bird and soared into the sky, escaping without a trace. This is an impatient little girl." Xiao Hua very regretfully stood in the air and shrugged his shoulders. This scholarly family's upbringing is indeed a bit lacking. Don't they know that not answering other people's questions is impolite? Junior brother Tipu. The azure lion flew to Xiao Hua's side. Xi Hui sat upright on top of it and said with a smile, "Previously, junior brother mentioned Vairocana? This little monk just happened to have some understanding, so I'll discuss it with junior brother now." "Haha, very good." Xiao Hua laughed loudly. His figure flew up and landed on the azure lion's back. He sat down cross-legged. The azure lion raised its head and roared. Blue clouds appeared under its feet, and it chased after the purple fur hoe that had already flown away. Xiao Hua often heard people say that when drinking with a bosom friend, 1,000 cups were too few, and when talking to a friend, half a sentence was too much. He didn't like spiritual wine very much, so he had never had 1,000 cups of wine competition with others. However, there were quite a few cultivators who didn't get along with him. However, when it came to a monk like Xi Hui, Xiaohua had never met him before. There was no need to talk about Li Zongbao, who didn't say a single word for a long time. There was also no need to talk about Zhang Qingxiao. Although this guy talked a lot, every word he said didn't deviate from the devil sect. He was abnormally arrogant. As for the other people, they didn't make Xiaohua feel relaxed and free. It seemed that in front of Ci Hui, he could talk about anything. He and Ci Hui could debate about the Dharma for several days in a row, citing scriptures and arguments. Sometimes they argued until their faces and ears turned red, but when they talked until their mouths and tongues were dry, they would look at each other and smile. Perhaps no one could convince the other, but the two of them had gained a lot in their hearts. Ci Hui's attainments in the Dharma were very deep, but he was also very humble. In front of Xiaohua, he didn't have the slightest trace of arrogance. Every time Xiaohua said something, every question he asked, he would definitely answer, and he would tell everything he knew. This made Xiaohua's understanding of the Dharma become deeper and deeper in these 10 days. Every time Xiaohua gained something, he would be exultant and share it with Ci Hui. It was as if he was a real monk. Xiaohua was close to Ci Hui, so how could Ci Hui not admire Xiaohua? Seeing that Xiaohua's Dharma cultivation was getting deeper and deeper, the smile on the corner of his mouth also became more and more intense. He felt very gratified that he had brought Xiaohua out of the Shaolin Long Temple in the Great Snow Mountain. If such a little monk with the root of wisdom was left on a barren mountain, the Buddhist sect would have one less famous senior monk in the future. Alas, the Buddhist sect is really amazing. This Xiao really underestimated them in the past. On this day, Xiaohua and Ci Hui debated for a while and mentioned a slightly obscure Buddhist principle. Ci Hui didn't know how to explain it for a while, so he closed his eyes and pondered. Xiaohua also temporarily rested. He raised his eyes to look at the purple-haired hoe and the strange bird flying in front of him, then he released his Buddhist sense again to explore the situation below. He sighed endlessly in his heart. This Dharma is broad and profound, and the profoundness within it is endless. Even if there are monks who don't cultivate the Dharma, they can still benefit a lot from it. If compared to Confucian cultivators, Dharma is literature and Dharma is martial. The two can be separated from each other, but they can also complement each other. If compared to my Tao's sect seems to be much weaker in this aspect. Tao sect scriptures are mostly about cultivation, about overcoming the heavens with oneself. If this Xiao didn't come to the 3 continents, how could I jump out from the bottom of a well? How could I know the mysteries of Confucian cultivators and Buddhism? Those prejudices against Buddhism from before, presumably also have to be removed. Whether it was Buddhism or Confucianism, there were those who pretended to be sanctimonious, those who pretended to be righteous, those who pretended to be benevolent, those who spoke sweet words but swords at the heart, and those who were cruel and merciless. But at the same time, there were those who were sincere, those who were warm-hearted, those who were open-minded, and those who were kind on the outside but soft-hearted. Didn't they say that the same rice could raise 100 different kinds of people? There are also 10,000 kinds of people under one cultivation sect. This is human nature, and it has nothing to do with the cultivation method. It's just that, since this Xiao is a cultivator, he must cultivate properly. Since this Xiao has the opportunity to learn from others, then he must learn from different cultivators. Learning from each other's strong points is the way of cultivation. After thinking through this, the prejudice against Buddhism in Xiaohua's heart gradually disappeared. He unconsciously relaxed, as if he had broken free from some kind of invisible shackle. Then he released his Buddhist sense and casually looked at the ground. Previously, when Xiaohua came from the snowy mountain to the Four Extremes mountain, the road was completely desolate, and it was rare to see people. Not to mention the snowy mountain, which was extremely high and covered in snow. Ordinary Buddhist children wouldn't go there. Even the Four Extremes mountain was very dangerous. If Xian didn't lead the way, Ci Hui might not have been able to find it. Therefore, what Xiaohua saw was quite similar to the Dawn Rain continent. But not long after coming out of the Four Extremes mountain, the scenery of this paradise began to change. The climate gradually became hot, and a kind of warm and dry heat was constantly in the air. On the ground, there were also more greenery. Strange trees propped up the canopy, covering the increasingly dense mortals in the shade. Chapter 30, 417. This strange tree was different from Dawn Rain Continent and Hidden Immortal Continent. The thick tree trunk was like a pagoda in a temple, stacked up layer by layer. This tree trunk was also bare, no branches could be seen. Only when it reached the top of the tree crown did it extend several zhong-wide branches in all directions. The leaves that made up the tree crown were also interesting. They were like palm leaf fans. When the wind blew, the tree crown swayed, as if a big hand was shaking hundreds of palm leaf fans at the same time. The fruits of this strange tree also attracted Xiao Hua's attention. These fruits were different from spirit fruits and spirit trees. They were not hanging on the branches but just stuck to the top of the tree crown, raised high. Moreover, each tree only bore 9 fruits. These fruits were of different sizes. The big ones were the size of a head, and the small ones were only the size of a fist. The fruits looked very strong. The green fruit skin tightly wrapped the fruit. Even if it fell from the top of the tree, the fruit would not be torn apart. The scenery was naturally in Xiao Hua's eyes, but what he paid attention to was the people in the scenery. The mortals of Elysium World were no different from Hidden Immortal Continent, but their skin was slightly darker, and their clothes were different. Most of the men wore short clothes, while the women wore light veils that covered their skin and faces. Of course, in addition to the secular people, most of them were ordinary monks. In Elysium World, there were many temples. These temples were either big or small, and the incense burning there was exuberant. Whenever Xiao Hua's Buddhist sense swept through the temples, he would see pious men and women kowtowing, offering incense, and giving money. Of course, Xiao Hua's Buddhist sense was often detected by the senior monks in the temples. At the beginning, Xiao Hua hurriedly withdrew his Buddhist sense, fearing that it would cause a misunderstanding. But after a long time, Xiao Hua found that not only did the Buddhist sense not have any hostility toward the temples, but it was also very kind. When it came into contact with his Buddhist sense, it would immediately withdraw, without any further warning. Elysium World. Is it really a Elysium World? Looking at the pious faces of the men and women, looking at the smiles on the faces of the monks, Xiao Hua sighed again. Are the people of Elysium World very satisfied? Alas, in this Zhao's opinion, Buddhism is a special sect among Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. Rather than saying it is a cultivation method, it is better to say it is a kind of faith. Although soul cultivators also emphasized on the power of faith, their believers were all natives of Meng Mountains, and their range was limited. As for the Buddhist sect, because of the doctrine of Buddhism, everyone could believe in the Lord Buddha. Although the power of faith of a single person was weak, and could not be compared to the millions of natives in Meng Mountains, there were so many of them. Perhaps there were hundreds of millions of people in the entire Elysium. This level of power of faith. Holy shit, it should be enough for the Buddha Lord to become a Buddha. Or perhaps this belief was the root of happiness? Since they were all beliefs, what was the relationship between the 12 great gods of soul cultivation and the Buddha of Buddhism sect? Why does my Tao sect not have a Tao ancestor? Why doesn't our Tao sect have any faith? The more Xiao Hua thought about it, the more he thought about it. He had thought about it before, but at that time, it was all doubts and doubts. Now that he saw the prosperity of the Buddhist sect, he couldn't help but think deeply. Xi Hui opened her eyes and saw that Xiao Hua was also pondering with his eyes closed. She smiled and asked, "Junior brother Tipu, have you comprehended anything?" Xiao Hua didn't open his eyes. He smiled and said, "This little monk was a little tired just now, so I took a short rest." Only Xiao Hua himself could solve the problem of Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. He didn't think that this Xi Hui, who only knew about Buddhism, could help him in any way. Look into the distance. We have arrived at the Saint River. Xi Hui didn't think it was a big deal. She pointed her finger into the distance and said with a smile, "Oh,
So fast."
Xiao Hua's heart skipped a beat. He opened his eyes and looked into the distance. Sure enough, he saw a stretch of green water spreading between the heaven and earth. One end of the green water was connected to the mountain range and the green shade, while the other end was connected to the boundless sky. The green water in the distance was so close to the color of the sky that it was impossible to distinguish the boundary. It was as if the green water was the falling of the Milky Way. Looking at the green water again, there were white sails smaller than a handkerchief. Under the white sails, there were doll-like boats that didn't move for a long time. Xiao Hua understood that it wasn't that these boats didn't move, but rather that they were drifting like the big boats nearby. It was just that they were too far away from here. The distance that the big boats drifted over was too small in his eyes. Is this the South Sea, or the Saint River? Xiao Hua was dumbfounded. Wasn't this river too wide? Nonsense, where is the South Sea? This can only be the Saint River. Xi Hui lightly reprimanded Xiao Hua and said, "This Saint River is known as the origin of the two seas. Not only is it vast and magnificent, it crosses the Pure Land world and has thousands of tributaries that converge into it. Wherever the river reaches, there are hundreds of millions of Buddhists. I don't know how many Buddhists rely on the Saint River to survive." "What is that?" While speaking, Xiao Hua frowned and pointed his finger in a direction. "Oh." Xi Hui didn't understand and followed Xiao Hua's finger. She saw that it was a river bay that was several li in size. The Saint River's water flowed slowly, circling and flowing between two hills. The hills were several li in size, forming a very calm river bay. The two hills were ordinary and not very tall. However, on the hills, there were two Buddha statues that were several zhang in size. Therefore, this river bay was different. At this time, on top of the hills, there were many men and women who climbed up with difficulty and piously prostrated themselves in front of the Buddha statues. Below the hills, the river bay was abnormally lively. What Xiao Hua said was a group of more than 10 people. Everyone in this group was wearing plain clothes. There were also some women with white flowers on their temples. In front of the group, there were several people carrying something that looked like a flower basket. However, in the flower basket, there were not only flowers, but also an old man who was lying naked in the flowers. The old man's hands were crossed in front of his chest. His eyes were tightly closed, and his face revealed a kind of serene smile. This group of people walked to an empty spot at the side of Riverbend, and slowly came to a stop. The few people at the front put down the flower baskets, and the 10 people at the back rushed forward. The woman plucked the white flowers from her temples and threw them into the flower baskets. Then, everyone worked together to lift the flower baskets and sent them into Riverbend. Although the river water in the river bay was gentle, it was still flowing. After the flower basket entered the river bay, it immediately floated into the river bay along with the river water. The flower basket was originally made of rattan. Just as it floated out several zhang, the river water immediately rushed in. The river water increased and gradually lifted the old man's body. Then, the flower basket gradually sank. Ba. At the side of the river bay, the more than 10 men and women had smiles on their faces. Although there were some women with sparkling and translucent tears at the corners of their eyes, they still chanted the Buddhist scriptures in an abnormally pious manner. Following everyone's gaze, the flower basket sank to the bottom of the river bay. The old man's body was indeed half sinking and half floating, moving along with the river flow. It was very obvious that this was the old man's funeral. These more than 10 men and women should be the old man's children and relatives. If it was just this, Xiao Hua might not be surprised. Whether it was the cremation of the old monk from the exquisite temple or the burial of the ordinary cultivators from the Xiaoyu continent, Xiao Hua had seen them all. This water burial was not considered rare. However, this river bay was more than 10 li in size. Not only were there many people at the side of the river bay, there were also many people inside the river bay. Of the people inside the river bay, some were taking a bath, some were immersing themselves in the water devoutly. Of course, there were also some people who were floating on the water, just like that. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. The people outside the river bay, some were kneeling by the side of the river, kowtowing to the ground. It was unknown what their mouths were muttering. Some were prostrating themselves on the water, devoutly cupping the river water with their hands and drinking it in big mouthfuls. There were also some people who were holding a few boxes in their hands, splashing something into the river water. If Xiaohua was not surprised, it should be the embers of the corpse after the fire. When the old man's corpse slid into the river water, there were still a few people who were wildly drinking the river water. These people only slightly moved to the side. Then, they simply ignored the old man and continued to pour the river water into their mouths. As for the old man's corpse floating by, the people in the river water turned a blind eye to it. They simply did not care. The people in the river water did not pay attention to the old man's corpse. However, the fish in the water and the birds in the sky did. Not long after the old man's corpse floated into the river bay, fat river fish swam over and surrounded the naked corpse in the water. On the river surface, several birds also flew down, either eating the river fish or swallowing the corpse. As for the old man's son on the river bank, not only did he not anxiously chase away the birds and fish, his face was instead filled with joy. These people, aren't they too crazy? Xiaohua looked at the inconceivable actions of the various people in the river bay and unconsciously became dumbstruck. He whispered, "Amitabha." Xiai Hui, however, acted as if this was a common occurrence. She chanted Buddha's name and laughed. What's so strange about this? Junior brother Tipu is a bit obsessed. Junior brother Tipu, don't you know? Although this saint river has the title of a Confucian saint, our Buddhist sect has never planned to change its name. However, this great river that runs through the Pure Land world already has no name in the hearts of billions of Buddhist people. Whether it is called Saint River or Buddha River, in the hearts of Buddhist people, it is only a Buddha river. It is a river that is unique in the hearts of billions of Buddhist people. It is a river that is filled with the blessings of Buddha, a river that carries the past life, present life, and future life of Buddhist people. Looking at Xiaohua's slightly frowning appearance, Xiai Hui excitedly said, "Junior brother Tipu, seeing this scene, could it be that you are not happy? Could it be that you don't feel that this is the eternal state of Buddha's light in our Pure Land world? Do you know that this great river is connected to the land of bliss in the hearts of Buddhist people? The origin of this river is the exit of the land of bliss. The destination of this river is the entrance of the land of bliss. Look at that newborn baby boy. After he was washed in this river, he received the blessings of Buddha. As for that old man who just passed away, he washed the dust of his life here. His dirty and smelly skin was left in the river. His clean soul flowed into the land of bliss along with the river." Chapter 30, 418. This, Xiaohua bitterly smiled and slightly shook his head. Isn't Saint River the source of the two seas? When did it connect to the land of bliss? That's the truth. Xiai Hui vigorously nodded and pointed at the distant white sails on the river. This is something that cultivators like us can know. However, how many of these Buddhists can walk along this Saint River? Even those fishing boats on the river have never gone from the West Sea to the East Sea, right? How do they know where the Saint River came from and where it went? Even if they have never seen it and never went there, they might not have never heard of it, right? Xiaohua continued to argue. They naturally have heard of it, and they even know that this river is called Saint River. Just like what Junior Brother said before, this saint is a special name for Confucian cultivators. It has nothing to do with my Buddhist sect. But do they believe it? Will they even listen? Xiai Hui smiled. Not to mention that there are hundreds and thousands of such legends. They are devout Buddhists of my Pure Land world. Their hearts have long been illuminated by my Buddha's light. They will not tolerate other filth. Hundreds and thousands of legends. They only believe my Buddha's words. Amitabha, this little monk understands. Xiaohua slightly sighed. He already understood the trick. Previously, he was still thinking about the benefits of faith. Now he saw the drawbacks of faith. To believe and be true is to be devout, but to believe and be foolish is to be evil. But who is devout and who is evil? How can Buddhists know? They can't jump out of the well. They can't distinguish the direction of the river. Only cultivators like Xiaohua, who can jump out of the well, can clearly see the direction of the river. However, thinking about the Great Formation at the bottom of the West Sea and the vast border of the 3 continents, Xiaohua shuddered. He really doesn't know how deep this well is. While speaking, the azure lion has already flown over this river bend. At the place where the river bend enters the river, the old man's corpse that Xiaohua just saw once again emerged a few times and slowly sank into the depths of the river. At the place where the corpse sank, a few small whirlpools appeared. These whirlpools also disappeared in a flash. Looking at the place where the whirlpools disappeared, from time to time, a few white bones emerged from the river. It seems to be the corpses that were previously buried in the water. How dirty is this river? Xiaohua looked. He was too lazy to talk to the excited Ci Hui. His heart felt a chill. Fortunately, as the azure lion flew into the heart of the river, the water became increasingly green. The things that could be seen at the river's edge also disappeared. Some fish that were unwilling to be left out also rejoiced. Flocks of birds also flew from the side to join in the fun. It made Xiaohua's somewhat gloomy heart. Xian didn't pay attention to Xiaohua and Ci Hui. She rode the strange bird and flew in front of Guzhen. The two of them kept talking about something. They seemed to be discussing how to enter the danger zone. At this moment, she led the 3 of them straight into the heart of the river. Seeing a strangely shaped reef emerging from the river, she stopped again and looked at it. Then, she patted the strange bird's neck again and flew towards the upper reaches of the Saint River. After flying for half a day, he finally stopped. He turned his head and looked at Xiaohua and Ci Hui, who were following behind him. He faintly pointed below and said, "It's here." "Here?" Before Ci Hui could speak, Guzhen, who was standing next to Xian, had a strange look on his face. He seemed to be in disbelief as he said, "Is Xian Tanue wrong? This is the famous Nightmare Reef Bay of the Sage River. How could it be the location of the Dao Sexer Ray Formation? What's impossible?" Xian smiled and said, "Taoism's array formations are unpredictable to begin with. Moreover, this is a forbidden area passed down from ancient times." "That's right. I'm not denying Taoism's formation, nor am I doubting Tanyu's discovery. I just feel that countless Buddhist seniors have come here to explore for thousands of years. How could they not find any clues?" Guzhen seemed to have lost his composure at this moment. His expression became even more anxious as he hurriedly asked. When Xiaohua heard the two's words, he glanced at Ci Hui's frown and lowered his head to look at the river. He saw that the river's surface was completely different from before. The other parts of the river were completely calm. Even if there were some surging waves, they were ordinary waves. After the waves passed, the river surface was completely flat. The river had a circumference of a few miles and was filled with whirlpools of different sizes. These whirlpools were letting out strange moaning noises, and gusts of strong wind were blowing in and out of the river, wreaking havoc in this area. Also, these whirlpools looked disorderly, but there was a dark gray shadow between 2 or 3 whirlpools. This shadow couldn't be dispelled even under the scorching sun. Xiaohua didn't dare to release his spiritual sense. The chaotic wind around his nose already told him that the world's spiritual energy here was extremely chaotic. It wasn't the kind of order that was commonly seen in Taoism's array formations. Xiaohua glanced at the strangeness of the river and asked Ci Hui in a low voice, "Is there a saying in Nightmare Reef Bay?" Ci Hui also shifted her gaze away from the river and said with a bitter smile, "It's not just a saying. It's simply a notorious name. This body of water is extremely strange. If a feather falls on it, even if it doesn't get sucked into a whirlpool, it won't float on the river's surface. All the boats that pass through here, regardless of whether they belong to ordinary Buddhists or Buddhist sect disciples, are not spared. They all sink into the water and turn into wood chips. The entire process is like a nightmare, so it's called Nightmare Reef Bay by the people nearby." The reason why it's called Nightmare Reef Bay is because there were previously people who believed that there were a large number of reefs under the river that caused such a strange scene. Those boats also sank after touching the reefs. However, after the investigations of my Buddhist sect seniors, there isn't a single reefs under this body of water. Apart from the fact that there aren't any fish or ordinary marine life, there isn't anything different here. There are even many seniors who used Heaven's Eyes to investigate, but apart from the river, they found nothing. As time passed, no more ships passed by this place, and no more Arhut came here to investigate. This place became a stretch of stagnant water. It's like a nightmare that no one likes. That's not all. Xiai Hui turned her head at this moment and said rather viciously, "This area of several dozen miles is very strange. At specific times, it will produce an illusion. The illusion's range is extremely large, more than 100 miles. Not only will the passing boats fall into it, the mortals on the boats will also lose their senses and enter a nightmare. When they come out of the illusion, they will either go crazy, be happy, be sad, or become demented, and so on and so forth. Even my Buddhist sect disciples are not spared. Of course, these people can be considered lucky to be able to escape from the illusion. When this old monk was young, I had a junior brother who was ordered by his master to go somewhere else. He occasionally passed by the Nightmare Reef Bay and accidentally encountered the illusion. He disappeared without a trace, and to this day, it's unknown whether he's alive or dead. My Crimson Reed Temple sent out disciples to search for several days, but they didn't find any clues. This old monk was also part of the search that day, and even used my Buddhist awareness to explore the borders of this body of water. This old monk still clearly remembers the apprehension and uneasiness in my heart at that time, afraid that this body of water would suddenly unleash its power and suck me in. At this point, Xiai Hui lowered her head and looked at the mouth-like vortexes below her. She sighed and said, "Since that day, old monk has never come here again. I haven't even come within 100 miles of this place. If not for New Tanua bringing me here today, this old monk definitely wouldn't have come." So that's how it is. Xian nodded slightly. No wonder Great Master reminded this one earlier. This one didn't expect there to be such an old story.
Amitba.
If it's as New Tanua said, this place is an extremely hidden ancient formation. New Tanua can take out the immortal weapon inside and destroy this formation to avenge my junior brother. Even if this old monk can't obtain the ancient Buddhist Kylie, this old monk is still willing. Gu Zhen said somewhat sadly. Xian didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and she smiled apologetically. Great Master thinks too highly of this little girl. This formation was left behind from ancient times. Even an immortal weapon is not the formation eye of the formation. Even if this one is lucky enough to obtain an immortal weapon, it's impossible to destroy this formation. If it's possible, we can find the corpse of the junior brother that Great Master mentioned. It's already good enough. Hearing this, Gu Zhen's body trembled slightly. He actually took a long breath and then said with a wry smile, "Corpse? So many years have passed. How can we still find a corpse? Even if there are, how many corpses have been piled up since ancient times? How can we still distinguish them?" Grandmaster? Gu Zhen's reaction was very strange. Not only did Xiao Hua and Xian see the abnormality, but Xiai Hui was also somewhat puzzled. She asked in a low voice, "Is there something wrong with you?" "Haha, it's nothing." Gu Zhen grinned. This old monk just has a slight feeling and thought of the past. Then, Gu Zhen urged again. "New Tanua, how do we enter this ancient formation?" "Great Master, don't worry." Xian said with a smile. "This little girl naturally has a way to enter the formation. It's just that it takes time to enter this formation, so we'll have to wait here for a while." Gu Zhen raised his thick white eyebrows and asked in a low voice, "Could it be that we have to wait for that illusion to appear?" Xiao Hua's heart also thumped, seeming to understand something. Fortunately, Xian hurriedly explained, "Great Master, this little girl doesn't know whether the illusion of the Nightmare Reef Rock is related to the formation, but according to the records, Entering the formation doesn't need to go through any illusion formation, but we still have to wait until dusk or sunset. Sunset? Hearing this, Xiaohua and the other two involuntarily raised their heads. However, at this moment, the sky was covered with dark clouds. How could they see the sun? When the three people's puzzled gazes fell on Xian's face, she clapped her hands and took out an ink cloud pupil. She said with a wry smile, "The situation inside is all in this ink cloud pupil, but there are some origin formation restrictions inside that others can't see." Chapter 30, 419. It doesn't matter. Gu Zhen waved his hand and said, "Since this old monk knows your identity and has accompanied you to this place, we must enter this formation. Since others can't see Mo Yuntong, this old monk naturally can't see it either, so there's no need for me to look. Everything inside will be done according to Netanyu's instructions." "What about fellow immortal Ci Hui?" Xian smiled and looked at Ci Hui. Ci Hui shrugged and answered very seriously, "Netanyu has held on to this Mo Yuntong for a long time, right? She seems to have never wanted this little monk to look at it. Since that's the case, why should this little monk look at it?" Xiaohua found Ci Hui's shrugging action very familiar. "Isn't this what I often do? I don't know when monk Ci Hui secretly learned it from me." However, Xiaohua just looked and didn't say anything. He blinked his eyes and looked at the water below him. In his opinion, Xian must be treating him as nothing like before. Little monk Ti-Pu, unexpectedly, Xian raised her hand and held the Mo Yuntong in front of Xiaohua's eyes. She smiled and said, "Do you want to take a look?"
Me?
Xiaohua was slightly stunned. He looked at Xian in disbelief and said, "Benefactress still remembers this little monk. This little monk thought you wouldn't ask about it like before."
How could that be?
Everything before didn't involve entering the formation. Now that we're going to work together to enter the forbidden area, how can this one not ask for your opinion? Xian said seriously. Although the result is the same as not being able to see it, this one still has to ask. My little monk master wants to take a look. From what Benefactress said, Buddhist awareness can't see through this Mo Yuntong. Xiaohua said with a smile. Xian frowned and said, "That's right. This one already said it before. What if this little monk can see it?" Xiaohua stretched out his hand and was about to grab the Mo Yuntong in Xian's hand. Just as Xiaohua expected, Xian didn't withdraw her hand and even stretched it forward a bit. She smiled and said, "It's best if this little monk can see it, so that I won't have to say anything in the future, and fellow immortal Ci Hui can rest assured." Xiaohua withdrew his hand as soon as he touched Mo Yuntong. He looked at Xian's dark and rough face and said with a smile, "Since Buddhist awareness can't see it, why should I? Even senior brother Ci Hui is at ease with you, so why can't this little monk be at ease?" Why do I feel like this little monk doesn't trust me? Xian snorted and withdrew her hand. "Ha, I've never met you before, Benefactress. I've just shaved my head and entered Buddhism, but you've already tricked me into leaving the mountain. Who knows what you're up to?" Xiaohua placed his hands behind his back and laughed loudly. "Now that we're about to enter the ancient array formation, what's wrong with this little monk asking a few more questions and probing a few more times? Don't tell me that I, the Arhat of Buddhism, am someone who can be easily fooled?" Cough, cough. Without waiting for Xian to say anything, Ci Hui coughed twice and said in a low voice, "Junior brother Ti-Pu, pay attention to your image. You are now a disciple of my Buddha school. Speaking nonsense will damage your merit." Cough, cough. Hearing Ci Hui's reminder, Xiaohua couldn't help but cough. This was going deep into the ancient array formation. Their lives could be in danger at any time. According to Xiaohua's knowledge, Ci Hui didn't seem to know Xian's origin and background. They were just friends. How could Ci Hui trust Xian so much? She didn't even ask about the situation inside the array formation and wanted to follow her in? If she was used as a cover or something, wouldn't her death be in vain? His probing like this didn't seem to be excessive, right? Could it be that this Buddhist disciple's behavior and sitting posture were more important than her life? Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. He looked at Ci Hui and then at Xian and said, "There's still some time before dusk. If Benefactress Xian has the heart, you might as well tell this little monk and others the details of this ancient array formation in Mo Yuntong. Although I'll listen to Benefactress's arrangements, if we listen to her in advance, we'll at least know what to do, right? Or we can also give Benefactress some suggestions." Hearing this, Xian nodded slightly. She looked up at the sky and said, "Little monk, you're right. Although I've already told fellow immortal Ci Hui some things, now we'd better discuss it properly." However, when Xian told him what she knew, Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Because according to Xian, this was indeed an ancient array formation. However, as for what kind of array formation it was and how many dangers there were, she didn't know. Of course, it was impossible for her to know what kind of ancient array it was. What she knew was how to enter the magic formation, and that there was a fairy weapon left behind by the immortal realm in the magic formation. As for why Xian was confident that she could break into the magic formation and get the fairy weapon, it was because Mo Yuntong had recorded several dangerous parts of the magic formation, and she had prepared several imperial weapons and celestial devices according to Mo Yuntong's description. "Great Aunt," Xiaohua almost blurted out, "you want to break into the ancient array formation and obtain the immortal tool with these things? You're too imaginative, aren't you? You think I want to?" Xian clenched her teeth, her face slightly flushed. She took out Mo Yuntong again and shouted, "This Mo Yuntong was originally incomplete. When I checked it, I also forcibly broke the restriction. It's already good that I know these things. If you can do it, you can see for yourself." In that case, Xiaohua waved his hand and said, "Little Monk suggests that we treat this as a sightseeing tour. Little Monk will pretend that he didn't hear about this array formation. You and I will rest here for a while and look at the nearby scenery. Then we'll cup our hands and say goodbye. How about we go about our own business?" Junior brother Di Pu, Ci Hui said with a smile, "Could it be that you didn't want to enter this array formation before? Aren't you interested in the ancient Buddha's fortune inside?" Xiaohua shrugged and said with a smile, "Benefactor Xian said it well. Little Monk was originally here to join in the fun. If there was Master Fontain's magic tool, Little Monk wouldn't have come. Now that Master Guzhan is here, Little Monk's role as a Buddhist disciple is also gone. Little Monk has never been interested in treasure hunting. Little Monk came with Senior Brother just to listen to Senior Brother talk about Buddhism and enjoy it." Beside him, Guzhan looked at Xiaohua and said in all seriousness, "Little Monk, what you think makes sense." However, if it was another array formation, Little Monk might persuade Xian Tanua to stop. But this is the Nightmare Reef's array formation. Even if Xian Tanua stops now, Little Monk will still try it.
Ah, why?
Ci Hui wanted to persuade Xiaohua, but when she heard Guzhan's words, she couldn't help but be stunned. Could it be that the junior brother mentioned by Master Xian's face was green and red because of Xiaohua's words. She was a little angry. Now her heart was moved and she said anxiously, "Could it be Masters?" "Yes." Guzhan raised his head and sighed. Looking at the gloomy clouds, a trace of tears actually flashed in the corner of his eyes. That junior brother of this old monk is this old monk's younger brother. When Ci Hui said this, everyone's heart was heavy. Xiaohua had already felt that this junior brother might have some connection with Guzhan, but he didn't expect them to be so close. "When this old monk was young, my family was poor. Before my younger brother was born, my father passed away. This old monk was only 4 years old at that time. My impression of my father was very shallow. After father passed away, mother was the only one who took care of old Na and my younger brother. Life was extremely difficult. When old Na was 10 years old, our family encountered a rare flood. Even now, old Na can still clearly remember that day when the waves reached the sky. Mother only had time to remove a door plank before the entire house was engulfed by the flood. That door plank was very small and could only fit this old monk and my 6-year-old younger brother. My mother could only hold the corner of the door plank with her hand. Guzhen took a deep breath and said tirelessly, "After drifting with the flood for more than half a day, my mother's strength was already exhausted. But this old monk was young at that time and didn't know about this. Plus, the flood had already overflowed, and I had already lost my cool. When my mother told me to look after my younger brother, this old monk didn't think the worst of it and only nodded. But before her mother could finish her warning, a fist-sized beam came along with the flood and smashed her mother into the flood. This old monk was stupefied. My younger brother cried and wanted to crawl under the flood under the door plank. It was at that moment that this old monk knew that in this life, I was the only one my younger brother could rely on. This old monk seemed to have suddenly grown 10 years older. I hurriedly held my younger brother in my arms and coaxed him, saying that it was Mother who went to the bottom of the river to catch fish for us. See, even Xiao Hua, who was used to seeing life and death parting, felt his nose sour. Beside him, Xion's eyes were even redder. Fortunately, when the middle of the night passed, the masters of Zhonglu Temple and other places had already arrived. The lucky survivors were all rescued. Because this old monk and my younger brother had no home to return to, we followed our masters to Zhonglu Temple. After a few more years, this old monk and my younger brother shaved their heads and became monks at the same time. This old monk's Buddhist name was Gu Zhen, and my younger brother's Buddhist name was Gu Nian. Gu Nian was exceptionally intelligent since childhood, far surpassing this old monk by 100 times. At a young age, he cultivated into the mortal realm. Therefore, he obtained the favor of the Sutra Depository Elder, who prepared to accept him as a disciple and personally instruct him. It was on the eve of the apprenticeship ceremony that this old monk received the abbot's decree to deliver a letter to a place. This matter was originally this old monk's, but this old monk was naturally reciting Buddha's Diamond Sutra and became lazy. When Gu Nian saw this, he volunteered to go in this old monk's place. At this time, Gu Zhen's emotions were already somewhat out of control. Who knew that once he left, he would never come back. Later, not only did the seniors of the temple search for him many times, this old monk also secretly sneaked into this place. However, they also found nothing. From then on, whenever this old monk thought of Mother's entrustment and thought of Gu Nian dying for this old monk, my heart would ache. After that, this old monk even made a vow in front of Buddha that in this life, I would find Gu Nian's corpse and comfort my mother's spirit in heaven. For this reason, this old monk ignored my master's advice and stepped into the guardian domain. I learned the power of the Diamond Sutra and cast the body of Buddha, eliminating evil and protecting Buddha. This is because I want to rely on my Buddhist divine ability to one day enter deep into the nightmare reef. Chapter 30, 420. At this point, Gu Zhen looks at Xiao Hua, then at Ci Hui and Xion. He says word by word, "Previously, I didn't dare to face it because I didn't have the confidence. Now that Buddha has used your hands to lure me here, how can I not take the risk and fulfill my wish?" Hiss, Xiao Hua gasps and murmurs, "Amitba, it can't be such a coincidence, right?" After hearing this, Ci Hui's face turns solemn. She looks at Gu Zhen and says, "Martial ancestor, although this little monk's Buddhist cultivation is shallow, I have some attainments in Buddhist magic. This little monk is not talented, but I'm willing to follow martial ancestor inside to explore." Xion clenches her teeth and says in a low voice, "Sad things all have similar reasons. Since we're all in the same boat, this little girl is also willing to accompany Great Master inside. Although this little girl doesn't know much about arrays." At this point, Xion suddenly realizes something. She turns to look at Xiao Hua and scolds, "Little monk, how dare you make fun of me?" Seeing that Xion scolds him without waiting for him to express his determination, Xiao Hua becomes furious. "Little girl, what do I have to make fun of you? If you want to go, then go. If you don't want to go, then don't go. Junior brother, pay attention to your manners. You're now a Buddhist disciple. Ci Hui hurriedly says, don't violate the precepts of anger and make Buddha unhappy. Who said that you have to understand the array thoroughly before entering? If Mo Yuntong explained the array clearly, then how could the immortal tool still be inside? Xian stared at Xiao Hua and said, just like you said, if we can explain the details of the array clearly, then we'll be going on a sightseeing tour. It's because you don't want to go in. That's why you're accusing me. Xiao Hua smiles, showing his snow-white teeth. Xian's words are reasonable. As long as there's a danger zone, it's already good to have some information about it. How can you understand the situation of the danger zone in detail? The reason why Xiao Hua doesn't want to go in is that he doesn't want to be a shield for others. And now, Gu Zhen was determined to go in, for the sake of his heart, not for the sake of his long-cherished wish. Xiao Hua would definitely help such a kind person. Moreover, this was the Dao Sect's formation. Even if Xiao Hua was not proficient in formations, he was still a genuine Dao Sect disciple. With him around, wouldn't the three of them have a greater chance of survival? Seeing Xiao Hua smiling and not answering her question, Xian felt embarrassed. She stamped her feet in the air and said, little monk, are you going or not? If you're going, then let's get it over with. If you're not going, then hurry up and leave. Xiao Hua faintly smiled, looked at Ci Hui and said, Senior brother Ci Hui, do you think this little monk should go or not? Ci Hui smiled but did not answer. She used her index finger to point at her own chest. Cruel and unscrupulous? Xiao Hua stared blankly and asked curiously. Ci Hui's figure swayed slightly, and she managed to stand firm in midair. She said angrily, ask your conscience. I do have a conscience, but I can't find my moral integrity. Xiao Hua stretched and said, when you need this little monk, tell this little monk. If you don't, then this little monk will hide behind senior brother. This little monk has a glib tongue. Why is he so similar to those pale-faced scholars of Confucian cultivation? Xian smiled. Don't worry, with Master Gu Zhen here, you won't be needed. You can just follow along and watch the show. I hope so. Xiao Hua shrunk his neck. Fellow immortal Ci Hui. Xian rolled her eyes at Xiao Hua and said to Ci Hui, this one remembers that you know Buddhism's heavenly feet and your cultivation is quite amazing. And it's not amazing, but since heavenly feet is called heart's desire, this little monk can go anywhere within 1,000 feet at will, in just a blink of an eye. Ci Hui nodded without reservation. This is also one of the main reasons why this one invited fellow immortal. Xian said, the first stage of this array is the most difficult. The array will only open for a few breaths of time, and in this few breaths of time, the entire water area within a few miles will be sealed. If not for a special ability, it's impossible to enter. And as long as someone enters the array during this few breaths of time, the entrance of the array will stop. Of course, this period of time is also very short, but for us who are around the 4th grade of origin energy, it's nothing much. And this little monk understands. Ci Hui nodded. This little monk is willing to take the lead and tear open the entrance of this array. Good, Xian nodded happily, and then explained to Ci Hui in detail for a while. The two of them didn't talk behind anyone's back, and they didn't transmit their voices, so Xiao Hua heard everything clearly. Although the situation described by Xian wasn't very clear, Xiao Hua already knew that this was definitely a Dao Sex array. Xian's words weren't false, and he couldn't help but feel a bit sad. This time, this Xiao seems to have been forced to do something beyond his ability again. After Xian and Ci Hui's discussion, the three of them put away their mounts. Xian took out the ink cloud pupil and placed it on her forehead to look for a moment, then released her origin energy and searched within a few miles, and then brought the three of them to fly towards the east side of the thousands of whirlpools. Whoa! Just as the four of them were flying, suddenly, a loud whimpering sound rang out, and within a few miles, waves of ghostly wailing and wolf howling could be heard. Xiaohua lowered his head to look, and the large and small whirlpools suddenly trembled rapidly. This was the source of the commotion, and the speed at which the spiritual qi of heaven and earth was absorbed increased. The hurricane formed by the spiritual qi of heaven and earth fell into the water, and when it rushed into the whirlpool, it condensed into a sound. Swoosh. Without waiting for the others to make a move, Xian stretched out her hand and took out an emerald green handkerchief from her sleeve. With a shake of her hand, she threw it into the air. Clouds and mist gushed out from the handkerchief, and after absorbing the noble qi, it turned into a cloud that covered everyone's head and immediately blocked the hurricane. Boo, boo, woo-woo. The whimpering sound in the water rose and fell one after another, like a frightening melody. The rhythm was like a tide that rushed into everyone's ears. Amitabha. Siai Hui chanted Buddha's name, and his hands formed the Akala seal. The Buddha's light emitted from his body and also covered the four of them, and that frightening melody could no longer enter. Quickly look. Xian suddenly pointed with her hand and cheerfully called out. Following the direction that Xian pointed, a trembling tornado gradually appeared in the thousands of whirlpools along with the melody. These tornadoes gradually gathered, and when they reached a height of 100 zhang, they suddenly whistled, like a wind dragon rushing to the western horizon. That hurricane was so big, first it was dozens of li, then it was hundreds of li. The spiritual qi of heaven and earth in this area was sucked into it, and it was like an unyielding wind dragon roaring as it rapidly expanded and directly rushed into the thick clouds. Swoosh! The hurricane rushed into the clouds, and a hole of dozens of li in size appeared to be insignificant in the endless clouds. However, it was also very mysterious. From this insignificant hole in the clouds, a ray of light shot out, like an orange sort of light falling on Xiaohua and the others, and sprinkled over the dozens of li of water around the nightmare reef. Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and looked at the hole in the clouds. In the slanted horizon, there was a touch of the afterglow of the setting sun, and it was rather reluctant to part with the grayish-blue dusk. The ancient array is indeed extraordinary. Xiaohua sighed slightly. He could also be considered a Grandmaster Array Master, and when he saw the array open, his thoughts were different from others. If this Xiao was the one setting up the array, I really would know how to set up an array that corresponds to the time. However, when he thought of this, Xiaohua's heart moved. Oh, perhaps this array doesn't pursue the details. It should be related to the power of the sun and moon. If this Xiao knew how to use the power of the sun, moon, and stars in an array, I think I can also set up such a mysterious array. While Xiaohua was pondering, the ray of light that fell on the several li of water had a beautiful change. The orange ray of light first spread out on the water surface, and then it actually followed the ripples of the water and converged towards the thousands of whirlpools. When the rays of light entered the whirlpools, the entire water body let out a low roar, and the water surface gradually rose. However, it rose by more than 3 inches. The thousands of whirlpools suddenly froze, and the orange ray of light also froze, like thousands of morning stars. This freezing only lasted for an instant, and then all the whirlpools suddenly reversed, and the rays of light within the whirlpools rushed out, rapidly swaying within several li. Every ray of light formed a palm-sized light shadow in the air, and the thousands of light shadows swayed in confusion, as if they were dancing with a group of demons, and it was even more bizarre. This, Xiaohua's gaze swept over, and his eyes flashed with confusion. The space above the water body was restricted by the array, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was already thin. These flashing lights didn't cause any fluctuations, and he really didn't understand how to open the array. Fellow immortal Ci Hui, at this moment, Xian's voice was filled with excitement, and she hurriedly said, "The ancient array has restricted divine sense, and has very little effect on Buddhist sense. In particular, there is no spiritual energy of heaven and earth here, and even the noble qi is a restriction, so your Buddhist divine ability is also very little affected. If you see a door appear in this light shadow, it's a door. As for what the door looks like and where it appears, according to the records, it's not fixed. Just as we've discussed before, fellow immortal can immediately use the heart intent technique to enter. Okay. Xiai Hui had already released her Buddhist sense, and her eyes were also unblinkingly staring at the light shadow swaying irregularly in the sky above the water body. She didn't dare to be negligent in the slightest and only answered casually. Seeing Xiai Hui, Xian, and Guzhen all staring at the light shadow in the sky, Xiao Hua frowned, but his eyes were fixed on the whirlpools above the water. After all, he was a formation grandmaster, and he knew that the changes of light-shadow came from the whirlpools. Tracing back to the source, if he wanted to find the pattern of the changes of light-shadow, he still had to look at the whirlpools. Moreover, if the three of them were looking at the light shadow in the sky, Xiao Hua wouldn't be delayed by looking at the side alone. Chapter 30, 421. After looking at it for a moment, Xiao Hua's eyes became a little dizzy. Those vortexes were spinning rapidly. Anyone who looked at them for a long time would feel dizzy. Damn it, Xiao Hua shook his head and closed his eyes, but there seemed to be more than a dozen vortexes in front of him. However, the vortexes in front of him were black and white and had already stopped spinning. Suddenly, Xiao Hua's mind lit up, and he almost cried out, "Spinning?" Since the light shadow was in the vortexes and the vortexes were spinning, then the spinning was naturally the source of the light shadow. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua raised his eyes and looked again. He saw that the more than a dozen vortexes were spinning at different levels, at different heights, and at different speeds. He couldn't see any pattern at all. Xiao Hua looked for a moment and seemed to see something. The rotation of the more than a dozen vortexes was changing at every moment, and every change affected the light shadow in the air. However, after Xiao Hua looked for a moment and even released his Buddhist sense to carefully observe for a while, he had no choice but to give up. After all, there were tens of thousands of vortexes. There were tens of thousands of spinning vortexes inside, and each rotation seemed to have an extremely subtle pattern. When these tens of thousands of patterns were put together, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was a mess. Wanting to find a way to enter the array formation in a short time was indeed somewhat unrealistic. When Xiao Hua raised his head and looked at the light shadow and the three people who were concentrating, Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. Alas, this Xiao is a bit of a dead end. This Xiao isn't here to set up the array, let alone to break it. I just need to find a way to enter the array. Since this Xiao knows that the light shadow is spinning, I don't need to look at the changes of the light shadow like them. However, I also don't need to find the pattern of the rotation of these vortexes. With this thought, Xiao Hua closed his eyes. His Buddhist sense fell on the water like a cool breeze, and it was as if Xiao Hua's heart had calmed down. Xian had been paying attention to Xiao Hua. Seeing that he wasn't looking at the light shadow and was looking at the water instead, she had already frowned. Now that he saw that Xiao Hua had actually closed his eyes and only released his Buddhist sense to scan the water, he was even more puzzled. A trace of vigilance appeared in his heart. He looked at the light shadow and then looked at Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua's origin was a bit strange. Xian had also asked Xiai Hui about it through voice transmission. Although Xiai Hui had never seen Xiao Hua use Buddhist supernatural powers, based on Xiao Hua's Buddhist awareness alone, Xiai Hui knew that Xiao Hua's Buddhist supernatural powers might not be inferior to hers. This kind of person with an unknown origin and uncontrollable cultivation base was not a good choice to travel with them. However, Xiai Hui had also sensed Xiao Hua's deep roots of wisdom through the debate of Buddhist principles. He was not the kind of evil person that Xian thought he was. That was why she insisted on bringing Xiao Hua along. Seeing that they were about to enter the array and Xiao Hua's strange behavior, how could Xian not be vigilant? Senior brother Xiai Hui, you have to be careful. After another half a cup of tea or so, there might be an abnormality. Right when Xian was vigilant, Xiao Hua suddenly spoke out. Xian was shocked and anxiously asked, how did you know? Xiao Hua's heart had calmed down, so he could see more. In his Buddhist sense, The thousands of whirlpools were like thousands of spinning tops, spinning crookedly. After looking at them for a while, Xiao Hua understood that although these whirlpools had different shapes and sizes, as long as the rotation of the whirlpools reached a certain pattern, it would produce a special change. And the simplest part of this pattern was that it was the same. Since he knew that the rotation of the whirlpools was the same, Xiao Hua only observed for a moment before he made a decision in his heart and casually reminded Xi Hui. This little monk's intuition may not be true. Xiao Hua didn't have time to explain. Moreover, he didn't know whether what he said was correct or not, so he vaguely replied. Xian slightly curled her lips. She wanted to look at the water, but she didn't dare to give up on the light shadow in the air. She simply ignored Xiao Hua and focused on looking at the sky. Since he knew that the whirlpools were the same, the door to the formation could be opened. Xiao Hua began to calculate where the entrance to the formation would open. Although Buddhist sense was the best at observing minute details and was very useful in observing the whirlpools, Xiao Hua also understood that the opening of the formation's entrance was definitely related to the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. If he wanted to know the location of the entrance, he could only use his divine sense to observe the changes in the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, or even use his transcendence vision. Of course, Xiao Hua was now a little monk of the Buddha sect, so it wasn't suitable for him to use his divine sense. If he used his transcendence vision, it would be somewhat overkill. After thinking for a moment, Xiao Hua released his soul sense. Sure enough, after scanning with his soul sense, Xiao Hua understood that the spiritual energy of heaven and earth above the water had been confined. Looking at the thousands of whirlpools, he saw spiritual energy of different sizes. However, these spiritual energies were condensed into threads, directly coming out from the center of the whirlpools. They wantonly swayed in the air like thousands of branches, messy and disorderly. The time it took to drink half a cup of tea quickly passed. As time passed, these threads condensed from spiritual energy of heaven and earth began to move in an orderly manner, gradually moving in front of Xiao Hua and the others. An irregular shape of several feet in size gradually appeared. This is the formation's entrance? Xiao Hua was overjoyed. Just as he was about to open his mouth to warn them, he suddenly froze, a layer of cold sweat appearing on his back. No! How could it be so simple? If such weak soul sense could discover the formation's entrance, then wouldn't the Taoist sect's divine sense be able to discover it easily? Why would we need to look for some light portal? Hurry! Over there! Just as Xiao Hua was hesitating, Gu Zhen's voice rang out, pointing at a place several li away from the group. Xiao Hua hastily raised his head. Sure enough, over 10 zhong in the air, thousands of light shadows suddenly condensed together, slowly forming a 3-meter-wide orange-red portal. Along with Gu Zhen's voice, Xi Hui's body flashed with faint Buddhist light. She put her palms together, chanted Amitabha, and raised her left foot slightly. It was with this raise of her left foot that Xi Hui's figure disappeared before everyone's eyes. A wisp of Buddhist light streaked through the air, rushing toward the portal in the air. Let's go. As soon as Xi Hui's figure disappeared, Xian urged them once more. Xiao Hua and the others didn't dare delay, each urging their own cloud to follow. As they flew, Xiao Hua's soul sense swept out once more, only to see that the portal formed by the world's spiritual energy was gradually disappearing. In the gap that hadn't completely disappeared, there was a wisp of red light flashing through. Hurry, hurry! Xiao Hua had just retracted his soul sense when he heard Xian's urgent voice. Raising his head, he saw that several kilometers away, a door had already appeared. But just like the previous lights and shadows, the door began to crumble as soon as it appeared. After all, it was several kilometers away. Even with Xiao Hua's lightning escape, there was no way he could make it in such a short amount of time. Isn't this just a test of luck? Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. If we're lucky, it'll be right next to us. If we're unlucky, it'll be like today. How can we possibly get in? Without waiting for the Buddhist light to reach the portal, Xiao Hua and the others had only flown a few li away. The 1 zhong-wide portal had already collapsed into 1 qi, and the orange light was about to disappear. But at this moment, the Buddhist light suddenly flourished and then disappeared. When Xiao Hua and the others hurriedly looked at the portal, a faint Buddhist light flashed, and Cai Hui's figure appeared there with the Buddhist light. Damn it, this is the heavenly feat. Xiao Hua was shocked. Isn't this the teleportation of the physical body? That's right, nascent soul teleportation is a divine ability of nascent soul cultivators, and only nascent soul cultivators can teleport. The physical body of a nascent soul cultivator can't teleport. But this Cai Hui's heavenly feat allowed her to instantly fly a few li away. She was even more powerful than a late nascent soul cultivator of the Tao sect. While Xiao Hua was shocked, Cai Hui seemed to have received Xion's instructions. As soon as she appeared in front of the portal, she immediately rushed in. Fortunately, although the portal was only 1 qi wide, Cai Hui had the appearance of a child and her figure was also short, so it was easy for her to enter. Cai Hui's figure disappeared into the portal, and the portal immediately stopped collapsing. However, the light around the portal was still shaking with all its might, as if a shabby wooden door was trembling in the wind and would collapse at any moment. Good. Xion almost clapped her hands. Then, she urged the auspicious cloud and said, "Let's speed up too. This portal won't last long." In fact, there was no need for Xion to say more. When Xiao Hua and Gu Jin saw the portal in such a state, they had already urged the auspicious cloud under their feet to rush forward. The distance of several li wasn't too far, but now that they were in such a hurry, it felt like an insurmountable moat. Fortunately, Cai Hui entered the door first. Although Xiao Hua didn't know that Cai Hui was inside the door's brilliance flickered and collapsed like paper several times. However, every time, it would stand up straight, as if it had been reignited from the ashes, waiting for Xion to arrive first. Xion didn't stop at all. She turned her head and called out, "Master Guzhen, I'll go in first. You can come in when you arrive." Without waiting for Guzhen to speak, Xion plunged into the small portal and disappeared with a flash of green energy. Xiao Hua didn't fly very fast. He followed Guzhen. When the two arrived in front of the portal, Xiao Hua looked at the small and twisted portal, then looked at Guzhen's tall figure, and said with a wry smile, "Master, how do we go in? What's so difficult about that?" Guzhen laughed and chanted the name of Buddha. Amitabha. As Guzhen's voice fell, Guzhen's body also flashed with a faint Buddhist light. Without any sound, Guzhen's figure slowly shrank. He lifted his foot and walked towards the portal. Step by step, Master Guzhen actually turned into a 1 qi tall human figure and walked in safely. Everyone has their own tricks. At this moment, Xiao Hua also sighed with emotion at the wonders of the Buddhist sect's methods. The bones in his body made a slight sound. His figure shrank a little, and he also rushed into the portal. As Xiao Hua entered, the portal finally couldn't hold on anymore. It twisted a few times and turned into pieces of inexplicable orange-red light and shadow that scattered in the air. Of course, the orange-red light and shadow didn't last for long. In a moment, the thick clouds in the sky closed and darkness enveloped the water region. The waves in the water region retreated, and the whirlpool rotated again. Whimpers like the cries of ghosts filled the dark night sky again. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.